Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen, to What If Deku Had Slide and Glide, a quirk that, in case you're not aware of, is from the spin-off of My Hero Academia called Vigilantes. It's out on Crunchyroll, it's out on pirating websites, and you can really watch it anywhere, because I gotta tell y'all right now, it is one of those shows that is just so worth watching. It expands so much on the lore of My Hero Academia, while also being just as good, if not better than My Hero Academia, because seriously, if you read the manga to this story, it is a banger. But yeah, no, I'm just excited to start this one, and I'm so thankful that someone actually commissioned this one, because otherwise I probably never would have gotten around to this one. So ladies and gentlemen, like with every other video, if you go on to like the video and I managed to entertain you for even 30 minutes, show the video some love, like the video, hype it up if you're on mobile, and with no further ado, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We begin our story with a young Deku inside of his crib, who, much like Koichi from the My Hero Academia Vigilante story, would actually start floating in the house. Inko watching this nearby, she would be like, "Wait, Izuku, are you flying?" Just watching on as Izuku with a big bright smile would be floating around the air. Her being stunned as she quickly goes on to call Hiyashi, who, rushing into the room asking what's wrong, she would say, he activated his quirk. Him saying, "Our baby can fly." As looking into the room, he would ask, "Where's he at?" Inko pointing up to the roof. As Hisashi looking up, he would see Deku, and so having to go into the other room to grab a nearby chair to stand on so we can grab him out of the air, Hisashi would grab the little Izuku, holding him up into the air, like pretending to fly, as Hiyashi would be like, "Wait, what am I doing? You can already fly." Turning to Inko, who would say, "Hisashi, this is incredible. Our baby doesn't even know how to crawl yet, and he's already flying. I'm just so glad he actually got an incredible quirk." Hisashi smiling as he would drive Izuku and Inko to the quirk doctor to get his abilities checked out, them saying that his quirk is known as Slide and Glide. Explaining that the quirk registry notes that there's actually somebody else with usage of this quirk, but nothing really of note, so it's not like they're going to be able to find too much out about this. Hearing this, Inko and Hisashi would both smile, taking young Izuku back home, where both of them, knowing that their son has a quirk, and a pretty impressive one at that, they would kind of just let Izuku grow up normally, meaning that in this timeline, the young Izuku would be a lot different than the one that we get canonically, because when he would enter preschool, Izuku already having access to a quirk would actually be looked at as really cool by some of the other students, having been a very early example of quirk manifestation. And so characters like Bakugo and the friends that typically would have actually gone on to bully Deku would find Deku to be really cool and actually have him be somewhat of the group leader, asking Deku what it feels like to have a quirk, asking him to show off what it's like to fly, as Deku would do exactly that, using his quirk and beginning to actually float up into the air, projecting his quirk from both his palms and his feet, stunning his classmates who would be amazed and be like, "That's so cool." This would ultimately lead to a best friendship being formed between Bakugo and Deku, who would say that once he gets his quirk, they're going to become great heroes. And once Bakugo would get his quirk, that's pretty much what would happen, because due to the fact that Bakugo would end up awakening a really cool explosion quirk, he would immediately go on to start saying things like, "My quirk's better than yours, Deku." But because Deku isn't the type of person to back down in this timeline, because he has newfound confidence and more friends, he would often say things like, "We'll see about that. One of us will become number one, and the other will just have to settle for number two." Each of them making a promise as young kids together at a sandbox, as we would have a massive time skip take place from this moment to the point where Deku and Bakugo are now 14 years old respectively. In their final couple of months of middle school, each of them excited as ever because in just a few short months, they're going to be getting ready for the UA entrance exams. And as the two would be talking about how cool it's going to be to finally get into their dream school, the thing they've been training on for years, suddenly the teacher would walk inside, kicking the door open as he would say, all right, settle down." This is when finally catching the attention of everybody, he would say, look, today's the day where normally I have to hand you guys career aptitude tests, but I know you all want to become heroes, throwing the paper up into the air as everybody begins to, pretty much just spam their quirks. All the while Deku and Bakugo looking to each other with smile, knowing that each of them had already made a promise and that they're going to be getting into the national school. And as the teacher would see this, he would then go on to proudly announce to the class that Bakugo and Deku were going to try to shoot for the moon, going on to say that he's pretty excited because with both of these students trying to sign up for UA, he's certain that one of them is going to get in, if not both, with their classmates beginning to cheer, saying that there's no way that those two aren't going to get into the national school. I mean, they were practically bred for that, and they've been training their whole lives, leaving Bakugo to jump up on his desk and proudly announce that he's going to make something of this school, that one day this school's going to be known only for the fact that it managed to produce the number 1 and 2 heroes, and people are going to be writing legends about Deku and him. As the class would start cheering, and then some of them would be like, don't you think you're taking it a little too far, Katsuki? With Bakugo getting a little mad and Deku having to calm him down. It's at this point that the class would start laughing, saying that those two have been the same ever since preschool, and that it's hard to believe that the two have been like practically gum ever since they met each other. Izuku, having a little bit of a cheeky smile as Bakugo would smirk. And with the day ending and no bullying to be seen, we end up having a scene where Bakugo would end up telling Deku that he's fixing to go to the arcade. Izuku telling him that he's just gonna go home and work on some studying, seeing as he has to make sure he gets his mind ready for the exams as much as his body. Bakugo waving to Deku, who walking home reminiscing on everything that led him up to this moment, he would begin remembering what it was like growing up with his quirk, training his quirk, and figuring all of the new likes and dislikes that Deku would have in this timeline, because this Deku would be a lot different than the one that we get in the original, believing his quirk to have something to do with flight, more so than its given name, Slide and Glide, because to Deku's knowledge, he's been capable of practically flying his entire life, getting better and better at using his quirk the more he's aged, looking to heroes like Hawks and Captain Celebrity, the #1 hero in America, an old retired hero by the name of Nana Shimura who used a quirk called Flow, and as Izuku would watch and look up to most of these heroes who have flight abilities, Deku would try to emulate their abilities. But what would be interesting for Deku is the way that his flight quirk would function, because not only did it allow Izuku to fly into the air, but it actually also gave Izuku an extra capability, and that is to stick onto walls and to actually fly and glide on the floor itself. Izuku didn't exactly have the capability of getting too high into the sky, but he got high enough in his opinion, because at any given moment Izuku's quirk is actually capable of taking him to about the height of your average Ferris wheel, which is significantly high for somebody that's using the quirk Slide and Glide. And the reason for the fact that he can actually do this is because Koichi in the original timeline lost the ability to do this because his mom would constantly smack him down, and ultimately he was never able to fully fulfill what his quirk was actually naturally able to do from a young age, which we obviously know that he's able to do now in the future at the final chapter of My Hero Academia Vigilantes, which is where Koichi literally flies up into the air where an airplane's at, which is thousands of feet into the air, and proceeds to save it, which, I mean, it's just like, bro, that's insane. I mean, at least when you consider it that it's literally a quirk called Slide and Glide, and considering that Deku hasn't exactly gotten that much mastery, hasn't gone to UA, and hasn't really had too much training with his quirk outside of doing parkour, because Deku would be a parkour junkie in this timeline, just due to the nature of his quirk, Deku would have a finite understanding of how his ability works, always having unintentionally kind of boxed himself into a set of limitations of what he believes his quirk can do. He's always thought that he can fly higher, or maybe move faster the closer he gets to the ground, but other than that, I can't really say Deku believes in too many other uses for his quirk, seeing as he has already used his quirk to win a multitude of parkour championships and nationals, using his quirks to fly around and zip around the arena. Izuku loving the game of tag. It's actually a version of tag where people are able to use their quirks, at least not crazy ones. It's a massive arena in which people literally run around it, and there's 3 people trying to tag him and 1 person running away, and the people trying to tag him can only use their quirks 2 times per match. But the person running away is able to use their quirk the entirety of the match, or 10 minutes, but since the matches are 11 minutes, it might as well be the whole thing. And mind you, this is something I'm completely making up, but Deku would be incredible at this sport, being really good at maneuvering and flying and zipping around, actually being the one to give Bakugo the inspiration to use his explosion quirk to actually fly like Bakugo does in the original, and it would be pretty freaking sick for him. But enough of that. Let's get into what actually happens as Izuku walks home, because much like you would expect, he still once again runs into the Sludge villain. As Deku would continue reminiscing everything that's led him to this point, Deku, completely unaware of his surroundings, wouldn't notice the manhole cover completely opening with the green sludge coming out of it. And so, before he knows it, his foot would be completely grabbed by a sludge that would quickly go on to surround him and practically begin to corrupt his whole being, going, "Good, can't believe I got off lucky. I didn't know that freak was in town." Well, he would begin going inside of the mouth of Izuku, laughing as he would say that he's a real hero to him. And as this would all be happening, Deku couldn't help but think about the fact that his entire life was really gonna end here. Not like this. Not this way, Deku would think, trying to use his quirk to fly out of there, but the Sludge villain wouldn't allow him to do so. And just as Deku would feel as though all hope was lost, Izuku would suddenly feel a surge of power come into both of his hands, blasting energy beams inside of the Sludge villain, which would barely manage to affect him because of the fact that Deku in this moment couldn't even get a solid foundation to stand on, and without having balance or charging up the attack like Koichi does, it would do nothing, resulting in Deku's life force beginning to fade. But just as all hope would seem lost, much like in My Hero Academia Vigilantes, All Might would show up, sending a smash to the direction of the Sludge villain as he would splatter him and reveal Deku inside of him. All Might rushing to his aid, as slapping him in the face a couple of times he would say, "Hey kid, you there?" With Deku waking up momentarily and seeing the blurry image of All Might, he would start freaking out, still being a crazy fanboy like he would be in the original, as he would start asking a multitude of questions to All Might, asking what he's doing in Japan and why he saved him. Him beginning to stop as he would say, "'Cause you're a hero, duh. Sorry, All Might, I'm just such a big fan." All Might laughing as Deku would say, "Oh, mind if I help you pick up the Sludge villain?" Both of them beginning to conversate for just a few more short seconds, as All Might, taking a moment to sign Izuku's notebook, seeing as his time limit was ending, he would end up pretty much saying goodbye to Izuku, who not even asking All Might if he can become a hero in this timeline, due to the fact that he's never had a single doubt that he could. He would watch on as All Might would leap away, still dropping the Sludge villain bottle once again like he would in the original storyline. Deku walking home, as suddenly, hearing the sound of explosions nearby, Deku would almost immediately start running towards that direction, and so, using his quirk to leap past a bunch of people and stick low to the ground, not actually sliding like Koichi does, but like running and using his quirk to give himself multiple different pivot points, he would end up arriving since he didn't want it to look like he was using his quirk, right? As getting there, he would notice that he couldn't exactly see what was going on, so, having a little bit of a mischievous smile, Deku would use his quirk to place one hand on the building, beginning to glide up it, getting a clear view of what was going on. Deku thinking, wait, is that the... As he would realize, it's the Sludge villain. How did it manage to get away? All Might had it with him. Before he would think, I'd hate to think about the person who's inside. Getting a good look as he would realize, It's Gachan, immediately leaping into action as flying towards the direction of the Sludge villain as fast as he can. Deku would yell out, "Let him go!" Bakugo all the while inside of the Sludge villain yelling out, "Get back, Deku!" Blasting explosions as he would yell out, "Let me go, damn it!" Blaring off explosion after explosion, all the while the crowd would watch and the heroes would yell out, "Get out of there, kid! Your quirk will only make things worse! Can't you see you're only making him mad?" Leaving Deku to yell out, "Even if I can't help, it's the job of a hero to try, even if the odds seem impossible. That's the essence of being a hero!" Blaring off towards the direction of the Sludge villain as multiple thoughts would be going through Deku's head, and Izuku would then remember that blast of energy that he blared off inside of the Sludge villain. Though it didn't do anything then, maybe Izuku could replicate that, and so, holding out both hands out in front of him, Izuku would hope and pray that this would work, generating a blast of energy as he would send it barreling at the Sludge villain, blowing off just large enough of a chunk for Bakugo to finally get some air. With this pissing off the Sludge villain, who throwing one of his tendrils to the direction of Deku, Deku would use his quirk to create a vantage point in the air and practically double jump, barely managing to dodge the Sludge villain's range. and giving All Might enough time to step in front of the Sludge villain, reeling his fist back and saying, "You know, kid, you did something no other hero has ever done. You gave me hope!" Throwing a smash to the direction of the Sludge villain, changing the weather immediately, and saving Bakugo by grabbing onto his hand at the last section. And as the Sludge villain would have been sent flying everywhere, All Might would quickly flash a smile to the camera before disappearing out of nowhere and leaving Deku to begin to be chewed out by the media. Bakugo seeing this and getting pissed off, with him saying, "And just what the heck do you think you're doing to Deku? He's the only one who managed to have the balls to step in there in the ring with the Sludge villain and do something, even if the odds weren't in his favor. Just when did it become a hero's job to stand idly by as a citizen tries to help a kid? You're all pathetic, you know that?" Before blasting off explosions at the ground and yelling out, "You coming, Deku?" leaving him to immediately float up to the air as flying behind Bakugo. The two would find themselves at the childhood park where everything started. Izuku asking Bakugo why he had to go out there and talk like that. Bakugo telling him that those damn news reporters and heroes pissed him off, saying, "Thanks for trying to help Deku, but maybe next time when you don't stand the best odds, maybe don't get involved." Walking off a bit angrily at the fact that Deku, of all people, his rival, was the one who saved him and not the other way around. And just as Bakugo would leave, All Might, who was watching their conversation from a distance, would finally arrive in his small All Might form, being like, "Hey kid." Deku looking towards him as he would say, "Yeah, what's up? Don't tell me you're here to talk to me about using my quirk in public." All Might laughing as he would buff up and say, "Ha, no, it's nothing like," coughing out blood as he would say, "that." Deku freaking out as he would say, "Who are you? And why are you impersonating All Might? You skeletal freak?" All Might holding out both hands in front of him as he'd be like, No, wait, let me explain. If you just give me 20 seconds. Look, kid, I am All Might. And the truth is that a long time ago I sustained an injury fighting a villain that never quite healed right." Lifting up his shirt to show the scar and explaining that that's the reason that he can maintain his large muscle form. Deku being shocked as he would say, "Wait, if you're being serious, was it the chainsaw villain?" All Might saying, "You've done your homework, but no. Even though that villain could pack a punch, he is nowhere near the level of doing this to me. The villain responsible for this is called All for One. But enough of that. Kid, today you managed to do something no other hero has ever done, and that is inspire me. The way you acted, the way your body just moved, and you couldn't sit by and idly watch your friend get killed. That right there is the essence of being a hero. Most pros actually have tales about their heroism before they even became heroes. And that's why I've come to ask you a question. Will you be my successor?" Stunning Deku, who practically at the edge of, passing out, would say, "Successor? Yeah, All Might, I'll be anything." As All Might would say, "Good. Then what I'm about to tell you is something you can never tell to anybody else, you got that?" Explaining to Deku the origins of his quirk, and how becoming his successor doesn't just mean being trained by him, but it means to quite literally embody everything that he was and is. And it even includes the benefit of receiving one for all. Deku practically passing out in that moment for real this time, as Deku catching him and shaking and being like, Kid, pay attention," would end up telling him that he believes that he has the makings to become a greater hero than he ever was. And as Deku would look at All Might and smile, All Might would see the image of Nana Shimura behind Deku, seeing as that quirk and that ability to fly and levitate off the air, it reminded him of her. So, plucking out a strand of hair, All Might would say, "Eat this," leaving a shocked Deku to be like, "What?" With All Might explaining why he actually needs to do it, because he has to ingest some DNA, and Deku being like, "Oh, I guess that makes sense." And by the way, just to let you guys know, the reason that All Might immediately gives the quirk to Deku is because of two things. One, he feels that Izuku is mentally prepared to accept the quirk, seeing as he already has a quirk, and an incredible one at that. And two, Deku's body, just from what All Might can see, is already clearly prepared to handle this quirk. So not needing the 10 month of training and actually having the 10 months of training to use the quirk one for all alongside All Might, that's pretty much what would end up taking place over the course of the next 10-month time skip. As we would see an image of Deku and All Might as the sun would set, and Deku would have All Might's hand placed on his head, him ruffling his hair, as he would go on to explain to Izuku that tomorrow they're gonna meet up at Dagoma Beach and begin training. Deku nodding as asking All Might a question. All Might would ask, "What is it, young man?" Izuku telling him that as much as he wants to keep that promise of never telling anybody about One for All, Izuku feels like it's only right to tell All Might the truth. He doesn't think he can go through with that. He won't tell any other person, but he wants to know if it would be okay if he could tell Katsuki Bakugo. He'd go on to explain that that's his childhood best friend and rival, and that they've been like brothers ever since the day that they met, explaining that he and Bakugo have always been incredible All Might fans, and for him to keep secret the fact that his quirk is just automatically gonna drastically change is pretty much going to be impossible. So All Might thinking this through and realizing that Deku might be right, the fact that he already has a quirk and all of a sudden this is going to be added to it might be very suspicious. So turning to Izuku, All Might would say that he wants to judge his character first to see if he's worthy, and so Deku would take a selfie with All Might, texting it to Bakugo, who would be immediately jealous of the fact that he got to meet him first. Deku saying that not only did he get to meet him, but he's actually going to train the two of them. Going on to send a message location to Bakugo and saying no other context but meet me here at 7 AM. Bakugo arriving exactly on the dot as he would yell out, "Deku, where you at?" Izuku coming out from behind a fridge as he would go on to tell him that the reason he brought him here was to meet All Might. All Might immediately showing up out of nowhere as he'd be like, "I am here!" Bakugo being like, "I can't believe it, Deku. You really went and befriended the symbol of peace, didn't ya?" Bakugo smiling as Deku would say, "Yeah." All Might beginning to immediately tell the two of them that they're going to do a little bit of training, telling each of them to pick up some garbage and get to work. And so, with both of them not using their quirks at all, they would begin moving as much rubble and trash as possible. Hours passing, as All Might, seeing the way that the two hung out, the way that they acted it by each other, All Might would realize that this Bakugo kid was really everything Deku told them to be. And so, All Might would decide that once they're done clearing the rubble, he and Deku would end up confessing the truth of One for All, advising Deku not to use it for at least until this is done, with us watching on as the rubble would be cleared in merely 3 months, seeing as Bakugo and Deku would not only view this as competition, but due to the fact that they're way stronger than Izuku, who did it all by himself originally, would get it done way faster. And with that, by the 3-month mark, Izuku and All Might would sit Bakugo down as they would go on to say that their relationship runs a little deeper. Bakugo saying that he knew that, but asking why he's telling them that now. Bakugo then going on to hear about the fact that All Might's quirk can be passed down, and that it's being given to Deku. Him getting out of his seat as he'd be like, "You're kidding! Deku, you've got All Might's quirk now?" As Deku would nod and Bakugo would start like putting his hand over his face. "Ugh, that's annoying. Your quirk was already good enough, and now it's going to be even harder to catch up to you. But don't worry. Don't you go thinking that just because you have the number 1's quirk, you're going to be that much better than me. Just means I'll have to work 100 times harder." Smiling at Deku, as internally he would feel a little heartbroken at the fact that now Deku's going to have this crazy advantage, not to mention the fact that it's his idol's hero, but not wanting to show that to Deku because he's his best friend and literally considers him a brother, Bakugo wouldn't say anything about it. And so, 7 more months of training would come and go, with Deku learning how to adapt the power of One for All into his quirk, and actually learning that this power actually very much so increased the capabilities of it. Because now, instead of just being able to generate this energy from his hands and feet, Izuku's actually capable of generating it from every single section of his body, flying just like Captain Celebrity would, having a barrier around himself of energy, because we've seen that Koichi's little energy barrier that pretty much allows him to float is capable of deflecting attacks. So it'd be pretty cool, not to mention the fact that it would greatly enhance his ability, allowing him to move at least 5 times faster. And it would even come with the added benefit of making Deku's pew pew blast that he's able to shoot off of his hands be that much more potent. Actually so potent in fact that functioning similarly to how Bakugo's blasts work whenever they're too powerful, it actually causes recoil damage on Deku's arms. So he'd have to work a lot on strength training, and by the time that he would find himself at UA, Deku would actually be more than capable of using 27% of One for All. Bakugo inherently having gotten stronger stronger as well, due to the fact that he would train with Deku whenever he could and whenever he wanted to, just because Bakugo wanted to make sure that he wasn't interrupting an All Might and Deku's training, because at the end of the day, it's not a trio, it's a duo, and Bakugo more than anyone understood that. And he would train on his own, pushing himself beyond the limits of what he ever thought he could reach, evolving his quirk and developing new moves way faster than the original Bakugo would, actually getting used to fighting somebody the likes of All Might due to the fact that he would constantly spar against Deku, seeing as that was something they used to do before. And now, instead of Bakugo typically coming out the victor, it was completely flipped upside down. Though these sparring sessions would never get too out of control, because All Might would always be there to ref and watch what's happening. And so, by the time that the 10 months would come and go, Deku and Bakugo both being dropped off by Mitsuki at the entrance exam would be wish luck, as each of them entering would go on to take the written exam. We're talking amongst themselves about how crazy these last 10 months have been. Suddenly they'd be interrupted by a blue-haired boy who'd be like, "You two, you need to stop talking and let President Mike talk. You're a crazy distraction," leaving Bakugo to get up and be like, "Shut up, dude. Who died and made you king? No one else is complaining about us talking, so why don't you mind your own business?" K, blaring off an explosion in his hand, with Ida being like, "Why, I never," and leading to Deku actually being approached by Ida way earlier than he would in the original, because while Deku would be, waiting for the exam to start, Ida would walk over toward him, asking him if having friendships like that is really in his best interest. That guy seems like a delinquent. And Deku, hearing this, would get pissed off, being like, "Where do you get off talking about people you've never met? Right here, right now, I can promise you something. Bakugo's gonna go on to become an even greater hero than you ever will." That's assuming you pass the entrance exam. Walking past Ida, as he would make his way towards the front, Ida being pissed off at Deku, all the while Izuku, being irritated at Ida and the fact that he called them out while the test was happening and literally nobody else is bothered by him, and now he actively went up to his face and started saying stuff that he has no idea about, Deku would be upset. Until suddenly, turning to his right, Deku would spot a girl that seemed to be freaking out, more so than he was. So, turning to her and spiking up a conversation about her nerves, Izuku would actually give her a few words of wisdom, encouraging Uraraka in this moment, who would thank Izuku for that, saying that she hopes if she passes, she'll be in the same classroom as him, giving Deku a big bright smile, as President Mike would say, "What are you all waiting for? There's no countdowns in a real battle, go, go, go!" Leaving Deku to immediately charge up full cowling in his legs as leaping up into the air. Suddenly, Deku would start using his quirk Slide and Glide to actively start leaping from thin air, looking like he was just running on nothing, and making his way directly towards one of the robots. Him arriving directly in front of it, as Deku holding one hand out and grabbing his wrist, he would say, "BAM!" blasting out a blue beam of energy that would completely destroy the robot. Izuku smiling as thinking that Bakugo's little trick for recoil really does help, beginning to use his quirk to leap from building to building, as he would do parkour around the city occasionally and slide on his feet, showing a little bit of everything that his quirk can do, and not necessarily using brute physical strength to destroy these robots, seeing as Deku doesn't necessarily want to abandon his original quirk and just act like a copy of All Might. So he's making his own version of All Might up, and as Deku would destroy robot after robot after robot, when suddenly, feeling the ground begin to tremble around himself, Izuku would look around to see a multitude of the other contestants begin to run in the opposite direction. Izuku looking up as spotting the 0-pointer, Deku would think, "Yep, not wasting my time on that," rushing to the direction of another robot. But just as Deku would do this, he would hear the sounds of a girl crying for help, and Deku's body in that moment, without knowing who it was, would just move. He instantly starts flying towards their direction. As zipping to the ground, Deku would use one of his blasts to destroy the rock on top of her, while simultaneously latching onto her arm and gliding across the ground like Koichi does, getting her out of the danger zone. As he would ask, "You alright?" her being on top of his back. She'd say, "Yeah, I think I'm okay, it's just my ankle," with Deku stopping for a moment to help her up, saying to climb on, get on piggyback style. At this, she would do exactly that, and Deku would carefully help her get up. As soon as she would do this, Izuku, using his flight quirk, would actually begin to glide to the direction of Recovery Girl, going about as slow as he possibly can, apologizing for the bumpier ride earlier, as taking her to Recovery Girl, she would be bright red in the face the entire time, just looking to Deku and being like, I never noticed how good he looked. No, I'm totally kidding. But for real though, Deku would take her to Recovery Girl, and shortly after this, the test would all be over. Her beginning to apologize for, getting in Izuku's way, with him saying that she has absolutely nothing to worry about, saying that he's almost positive he made it into the school. I mean, after all, he must have racked over 50 points. Her smiling as she would say, well, I'm glad. And after this would all be said and done, Deku would end up walking home, excited as ever at his performance and texting Bakugo to see how he performed, him telling him that he actually performed amazing, cause not only did he manage to get 88 robot points, but he even managed to destroy the 0-pointer, asking Deku if he also took his down, but Deku would tell him he didn't since it was worth no points. Bakugo replying, you idiot, you should have taken it down just to send a message. Deku saying that he doesn't really feel like he has to. Bakugo probably just replying with 3 dots as Deku would start laughing. After this would all be said and done, a few days would pass and both boys would receive their entrance exam letters, both immediately being praised in their videos, with Izuku actually having gotten more points than Bakugo due to the fact that he had gotten 50 robot points and 60 rescue points, leaving Bakugo to have a blank face who would have actually already been bragging about the fact that he did better than the simple successor, and Deku just starts laughing, Bakugo being pissed off as he angrily leaves the house and tells Deku that he'll be seeing him at school. It's here that Deku would pretty much just take the next couple of days to relax, seeing as All Might wouldn't really be hitting him up more so these days, cause he has to get ready for becoming a teacher. But the last day prior to actually beginning school, All Might would text Deku at like 7 p.m. asking him to meet him at Degoma Beach. Izuku immediately, getting out of his window, as arriving there, he would ask All Might what's up, All Might explaining that he simply just wanted to congratulate his successor in person, because not only did he manage to impress by getting a significant amount of robot points, but he even got an impressive amount of rescue points, saying that Deku really did show what it's like to be an all well-rounded hero, saying that tomorrow as he enters his first day into the academy, it should be Izuku's #1 priority to let his class know that he is here, as All Might would smile, and Deku would say, so you want me to rip a page out of Katsuki's book? All Might saying, I mean, if you want to put it that way, as Deku would laugh and tell All Might that he'll do his best. It's at this point that Izuku would end up making his way home, as he would look at a picture of him and All Might when they had first started their training. Deku saying that he couldn't believe how much muscle mass he's gained since starting to work out with All Might. Looking at his arm as passing by a nearby convenience store, Deku would hear the sounds of a young girl screaming. Izuku immediately taking a high vantage point to see what was going on, noticing that there was 3 dudes trying to mug her. And as Deku would see this, he would lunge into action, immediately gliding down as Deku aiming both hands to the direction of 2 of the villains. Izuku would blast his beams, sending both boys crashing down to the floor, with the last one being like, whoa man, what are you doing? Lifting both of his hands up, giving Deku the chance to hold one arm out like he was about to shoot a cannon at him and be like, get away from the girl. Why were you trying to mug her? Him saying, we're not trying to mug her, we're just acting students. We were trying to practice a scene where we were going to be muggers, and Lily over here decided that she wanted to be a method actor, so we came over here to do it. I promise, dude, we're just acting. The girl be like, he's not lying, I'm sorry. Leaving Deku to facepalm as he would kind of just like hide his face and be like, well now I just feel like a big jerk. Turning to the other 2 guys as he would help them up and profusely apologize. But after they would go on to say that it's mainly their fault, Izuku would end up walking home a bit ashamed and embarrassed if he's being honest. Him deciding to just sleep this off because that was just, it wasn't fun. And so, with the next day finally coming around, Deku would find himself ready for his first day at his Hero Academia, walking into class alongside Bakugo as the 2 friends would have ended up waiting for each other, as both boys taking everything in and pretty much doing a quick scouring around the classroom. They would both note that these are the people that they're going to be spending the next 3 years with. Deku sitting towards the front with Bakugo, as the 2 of them would sit there talking amongst themselves. That is, until Ida would end up showing up. Walking directly towards Izuku, as bowing down, Ida would immediately apologize, saying, it's come to my attention that I misjudged you and your friend. I'm sorry, you're clearly the superior hero to me. As Izuku would say, dude, it's no sweat. Bakugo being like, it's totally a sweat. I need you on your hands and knees. Ida being like, what? As Izuku would be like, he's kidding. Alright, Bakugo? Him saying, yeah, we'll just say I'm kidding. When suddenly a brown-haired girl walking into the class would say, it's you. Hey, I wanted to thank you for saving me, but before she could finish that sentence, Aizawa would get out of his sleeping bag and be like, alright class, settle down, put these on and meet me outside. leaving everybody to be like, who are you? As Izuku would be like, that's Eraserhead. You guys telling me you guys really can't recognize him? Deku immediately like pulling out like a hero notebook as looking at the picture of Eraserhead that they have there and then looking at the real one, Deku would say, it's an honor to meet you, sir. Standing up to shake his hand, as Aizawa would say, we're not there yet, kid. Now, did any of you listen? Put these on and meet me outside. And don't make me repeat myself. As he would make his way outside and everybody finally listening to Aizawa would end up doing exactly what he says. Some people in the locker room being like, hey, how did you figure out that was Aizawa? He looks nothing like him. I mean, he wasn't even wearing the goggles. Deku saying that he would have recognized him anywhere. He's actually one of his favorite heroes. Bakugo rolling his eyes as he would say, yeah, it's because Deku's a total nerd. Deku just being like, hey, as they finally make their way outside, and once there, the ball would be tossed to the person with the highest score, in Izuku Midoriya, who having the ball in his hand would ask what he's supposed to do with this. Aizawa going on to explain that his job is to stay inside that circle and toss it as far as possible, breaking down the fact that for all their lives they've been told that everyone's equal, but today they're gonna find out just how wrong that sentiment is. Deku hearing that is almost simultaneously he would hear All Might telling him in his mind to let the class know that he is here. And so, as Deku would grip this ball in his hands, he would wonder what he should do to not look too suspicious. I mean, after all, his quirk is called Slide and Glide, not Super Strength. And then, it would hit him. Deku would come up with the perfect idea, channeling about 10% of One For All into his arm, while simultaneously throwing it and blasting a wave of energy at it. As Deku would prepare, he would close his eyes, beginning to charge up the energy for about 15 seconds, Aizawa asking him if he's gonna do anything now or later, but Bakugo would be the only one knowing what he was planning. So when Deku would finally flick his arm to the direction of the sky while simultaneously blasting a beam of energy, it would look as though that's the reason that it flew off so far, but in reality, it was a mix of Deku using the super strength from One For All and, well, of course, his quirk. So as Aizawa would look towards the device, he would suddenly read out the number, 1,687 meters. Shocking the class, who all immediately get hyped, with Aizawa thinking, was that Koichi's blast? Having this thought completely consume his attention, as he wouldn't even begin to turn to the class or say that whoever comes in last place would be expelled. He would simply move on to the next exam, keeping a close eye on Izuku, who would have clearly caught his attention. And as the next couple of exams would begin, he would watch on closely as Izuku would use his quirk to fly past the 50-meter dash event, use One For All to do better in the grip strength test, and fly off into the air just like Koichi does during the standing long jump, which would almost immediately confirm every suspicion Aizawa had, smiling as he would think back to the Naruhara district located in Tokyo, remembering the adventures that he had had alongside the Crueler and the rest of his friends who would have helped out with many of those situations. Aizawa thinking back to that coffee shop he had always frequented, as he would decide that after this is all over, he would try to get a word in with Izuku. So as the next test would begin and we would start this repeated side-to-side steps, Deku would use his quirk to glide on the floor as fast as ever, doing exactly what Koichi can do, but pretty much 2 times faster, stunning everybody including Aizawa, who would wonder how in the world this kid has that much of a finesse over a quirk when he's barely 14 or 15 years old, and paying close attention when Deku would do the final remaining tests and push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups. Him beginning to read out the final scores of everybody and not even mention anything about expelling anyone, saying that now these are their current rankings, encouraging them to work harder on their quirks and absorb everything that they learn at UA like a sponge, to make sure that the next time that they take these tests, they won't fall victim to falling down a few slots. And with everything finally being over and everybody in the class beginning to gather their things, Aizawa would head towards the teacher's lounge, noticing that All Might was staring directly at the class, asking exactly which student he had his eye on. All Might saying that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Aizawa saying, yeah, right. As if I didn't know you were probably watching either Katsuki, Bakugo, or Koichi. Him walking away as All Might would say, who's Koichi? Aizawa never having stopped to correct himself, but inwardly realizing that he used the wrong name to address Izuku. As he would do so, he would make his way towards the files of Deku and note that his quirk is called Slide and Glide, realizing that they must have a connection, a family member or something, because quirks like this don't just manifest and start going haywire. It's not an elemental power, it's something more fundamental, I guess. As Aizawa would make his way towards the class watching them leave, this is when he would catch Izuku and tell him to come, he'd like to have a word with him. Aizawa in this moment would be frank. Listen, kid, I saw the way you performed with your quirk back there, and I've gotta say, you've impressed me. But if that was the only thing, I wouldn't be calling you back here. The reason is because your quirk functions a lot like somebody I used to know back in a previous life, and I figured it would do you some good to look into him. Maybe you guys have some sort of connection somehow, giving him the name of the Skycrawler, a hero from the US that originated from Japan and has been working closely alongside Captain Celebrity. Deku saying, oh right, yeah, he's one of Captain Celebrity's sidekicks. I've actually read up on him, and his quirk actually did seem a bit similar to mine at first glance, but then I realized that they're a bit different, or at least that's what I thought prior to 10 months ago, rubbing the back of his head as he would say, you know what, maybe I will look more into him. Who knows, maybe I could learn a thing or two from the hero. Thinking Aizawa is finally making his way home, Deku would finally text Bakugo back and answer what happened. Izuku telling him that he just wanted to give him a bit of piece of advice. Bakugo saying, that's it? I thought he was gonna scold you out for sure. Or maybe even call you out on the nature of your quirk. Deku just gulping as he would think about that and realize, yeah, I'd hope that never happens. As the next day would finally come and go, and as the students would find themselves in the cafeteria, Deku and Bakugo would be eating together when suddenly Uraraka and Ida sitting next to them would begin to talk amongst themselves. Bakugo being like, when did I ever invite these guys? Deku saying that he did. He figured they should make up with Ida, and Uraraka, well, she's a friend. Bakugo rolling his eyes as having to deal with these two at his table, they would end up having lunch, and Bakugo kind of just stays quiet the whole time, all the while Deku actually finds out about Ida, how he's related to the Engine family, and how pretty cool it is that he comes from money, while they find out that Uraraka initially wanted to become a hero just because, you know, she wants some of that bread. So, with lunch finally coming and going, the students would end up making their way to their classrooms, where Deku and Bakugo, having known that All Might was going to show up eventually, would watch him enter the classroom, but Deku, being who he is, couldn't help but still be excited. Even though he knew it was going to happen, he was just kind of like a person waiting for a package to arrive. He still couldn't get over the joy that he felt in that moment. And so, as All Might would be speaking, Deku would be staring at him as though this was the first time he ever met him, paying close attention as All Might would click the button, revealing their hero costumes, with Deku once again having that very, very ugly one that his mom would have made him, because, you know, why not? Leaving everybody in the class to stare at him and be like, that's your costume? Bakugo making fun of him, as eventually Deku, you know, just kind of rolling his eyes and being like, what? My mom made it. He would end up then listening to All Might, who begins to explain the rules of their event today, going on to say that they're going to be participating in the Heroes vs. Villains event, and that it's going to be a bit of a battle trial, diverting the students' attentions towards a projector, as suddenly, All Might clicking a button, it would start picking random names, and all of the teams would be assigned in a matter of seconds, Deku actually being paired up with Ida, who shocked at this outcome would smile, looking over towards Ida and saying that he hopes that with this, they can finally put all that mess behind them. Ida saying that it's been that way, extending a hand, as Deku would say that he promises that no matter what, they won't lose. Both of them kind of dapping up, as Bakugo would have actually been paired up with Todoroki, funny enough, and obviously they end up destroying their competition, Bakugo and Todoroki I mean, as Deku and Ida would prepare to face off against their opponents, in Hagakure and Kaminari. Reason for this being that sometimes when I do this event, I actually just spin a wheel just because it's kind of boring sometimes covering the exact same thing every time. Oh wow, Deku versus Bakugo, oh so cool. Yeah, no, it gets boring. But anyways, with this happening, Deku and Ida would once again be assigned to the hero role, with the two of them immediately creating a plan as to how they're going to get to the bomb. Deku saying that using each of their quirks individually, they should be able to check each floor fast as ever, but it might be a bit dangerous to do that since they might end up having to face off against both of their opponents. Izuku playing things cautiously because he's not the type of person to, you know, underestimate his opponents. So instead, Ida and Izuku would use both of their speed quirks to check every single room individually until they finally make it to the third floor, where upon arriving, Deku would turn to Ida telling him that he's almost certain that this floor is going to be where the bomb room's at. Izuku and Ida starting from each side of the corridor as they would open the doors carefully and then kind of like hide behind it, making sure that they wouldn't get hit by that kid's lightning because Deku already saw that on display and he was not trying to get his brain fried. But luckily, as they would open door after door after door, nothing would happen, and finally one more would be left. Invisible Girl watching this all happen since she actually would be in the corridor and not wanting to say anything out of fear of getting beat up by these guys, she would stay silent, watching on as Deku and Ida would be about to grab onto the door. But knowing that if both of them go in there with Kaminari, they might be done for, she would grab onto Izuku, who immediately feeling the body of Invisible Girl on him would be like, what's going on? Immediately getting like a little bit of like a nosebleed scene, as she would slap him across the face, be like, pervert! Deku would be like, what? With him beginning to slide across the ground, seeing as that's the best way he can maneuver in buildings. Bakugo watching this all take place, as he would just be dying of laughter, having already finished his match with Todoroki. Watching on as Deku would aim projectiles towards Invisible Girl and miss because he couldn't see where she was, although while Ida would actually be getting his brain fried thanks to Kaminari, who would have unloaded all of his electricity in one go, becoming stupid, leaving Deku to look around and see that Invisible Girl can't stop him, and Kaminari over there can't do anything either. So, immediately gliding on the walls and moving as though he could fly on every single plane of gravity, Deku would fly immediately towards the bomb room where, landing on top of it, All Might's voice would echo, "Hero Team wins!" Bakugo just cackling up in the corner, being like, he's so freaking lame. He let himself get startled by Invisible Girl over there. With All Might watching on, having a sweat drop, thinking that was a little lame. This is when as Deku and Ida would enter the room, their classmates would end up pretty much doing an analyzation on how they performed, with Momo saying that their performance was lackluster to say the least, explaining that the only reason they lost was because their opponents were even more incompetent. The class all basically thinking that Deku is not as cool as he seemed the first day, with Bakugo being the only person to crack a few jokes and then finally, go back to respecting Deku. Because at the end of the day, he knows that Deku does indeed have that dog in him. So with class finally being over, Deku and Bakugo would be walking home, him talking about how embarrassing that was. Bakugo saying, I'll say, you definitely made sure that you lost a couple of aura points back there. Deku being like, was it really that bad? As Bakugo would say, it was awesome. Deku knowing that, yeah, it was that bad. But since this isn't exactly a big deal, we're now going to be jump cutting to the USJ arc. All of the students in the bus just arguing about who the strongest in the class is, with the conversation mainly rotating about Bakugo and Todoroki. Deku not even being included thanks to that lackluster performance in the last show, with him just thinking in the back seat that this time he'll show everyone just how great his quirk can be, kind of looking away a little sporadically. But with that happening, the students would eventually end up arriving to the USJ, and once there, the Hero 13 would begin her speech about how dangerous quirks can be, when suddenly, Kurogiri would warp get in the midst of the arena, teleport all of the villains in, including Shigaraki and the Nomu, and give his iconic villain speech, leaving Bakugo and Kirishima to attack at him, and ultimately being teleported away. Deku noting that both of the areas that they attacked was completely flukes, Deku holding out one arm in front of himself would aim a blast of energy directly towards Kurogiri, who counters that immediately by opening a warp gate portal, stunning Deku, who would watch on as his projectile would actually hit him in the back, him falling down into a portal simultaneously as that would happen, as before he knows it, Deku would be surrounded by a body of water. Deku looking around to see a multitude of Fishman villain, as he starts freaking out in the water and suddenly a tongue wraps around him. Him feeling this, he'd be like, before looking to see that it was Suyu and arriving on the boat. This is when Deku, placing both hands in front of his face, would be like, why? Why do I keep... As he just pretty much locks in, he's like, no, I concentrate. He would then turn towards Suyu, thanking her, as looking to Mineta, he would think, yeah, he's gonna have to save them. And so, turning to Suyu and Mineta, Izuku would go on to tell them that he needs them to buy a few seconds, saying that if any villains try to come up, they need to take care of them. Izuku immediately charging up a blast for about 30 seconds, as Deku, after finally having charged the whole thing, he would scream out, die! Much like what Bakugo would do, sending a blast of energy straight into the water so powerful that it would create a sort of mini tsunami-like effect, sending all the villains spiraling out of the water and giving Deku just enough time to blast projectiles at all of the villains, having to only charge them for about half a second each, since that would be more than enough to knock out a random villain. And having handled that and impressed Mineta and Suyu, Deku would smile, saying that it's about time he did something cool, both of them saying that they should make their way towards the rest of their class, Deku agreeing as they would begin to make their way there before Deku would spot Aizawa, him having his head be grabbed by the Nomu as he would slam it into the concrete. and Deku, seeing that, just couldn't stand idly by. Immediately leaping into action, Deku would fly to the direction of Aizawa, aiming one of his projectiles directly to the back of the head of the Nomu and blasting it, which would do absolutely nothing. Deku watching on as Shigaraki would laugh, saying, "Get lost, kid. You're not exactly the type of competition the Nomu was created to fight." As Zuko, gritting his teeth, is aiming his blast towards the direction of Shigaraki, he would say, "Tell him to stand down or I'll take you down instead." Shigaraki smirching as he would say, Well, isn't that a great idea? But unfortunately, I've already given the Nomu a directive, and I won't be threatened by you. Immediately rushing to the direction of Izuku, calling his bluff, with Izuku blasting Shigaraki with a 10-second charged up projectile, sending him crashing to the ground nearly unconscious, his visi blurring, as Kurogiri would warp gate in front of Shigaraki, protecting him so that Deku couldn't deal more damage, and Deku, noting that Kurogiri was a horrible matchup for him, would simply turn back to Aizawa, crying out, "Aizawa!" who in this moment would say, "Get out of here, kid," before his head would be smashed directly into the concrete once more, and he would pass out, leaving Deku to grit his teeth and glide directly to the direction of the Nomu, as charging up a 30% one-for-all smash, he would send it crashing directly into the Nomu's ribcage. But as Deku would realize, it would do nothing but anger the Nomu, who finally, turning his attention to Izuku, would roar, beginning to chase Izuku around that area, him using slide and glide much like Koichi does to evade all of the Nomu's attacks, realizing that he's gonna be needing more than one for all. Distracting the Nomu for about 30 seconds and planning his approach, realizing that he needs time, he needs just 10 seconds. Just 10 seconds, he would think, when suddenly he could hear the sound of ice coming towards his direction, freezing half of the Nomu's body, as Deku would say, "Perfect!" This is when Deku, stopping moving, would then end up charging an incredibly powerful projectile blast, reeling his arm backwards, as pouring everything that he had inside of him, Deku would send his fist crashing directly into the stomach of the Nomu, blaring off the projectile simultaneously in a 100% charge, as the Nomu's body would explode everywhere. The villains being stuck in horror, with Kurogiri immediately warp gating Shigaraki and himself out of there, staring almost deep into the soul of Izuku, who standing there would be just staring at the Nomu, realizing that his quirk is that strong, suddenly feeling the recoil of his arm, the adrenaline finally having timed out, thanks to Deku looking at his arm, which would be purple in this moment. Deku realizing that the power of one for all that he just used was way too much for his body, having a million thoughts flood his head before suddenly he would remember Aizawa, and so using his quirk to fly towards him and pick him up, Izuku would check him, checking on his wrist and chest to see if he's still alive, noting that he is, as simultaneously All Might actually would be the first hero to arrive, and Deku, calling out to All Might, would say, "Quick, All Might, come here, Aizawa's injured." All Might leaping down is telling Izuku to take him to a paramedic immediately. All Might would go throughout the entirety of the USJ, taking down any villains that weren't apprehended by the students or Aizawa. Although while simultaneously on the villain side of things, Shigaraki would be pissed as ever at All For One, telling him that he lied. The Nomu wasn't gonna be capable of fighting All Might. A little brat blew that thing to smithereens. Shocking All For One, who would ask him to describe what he looked like. Shigaraki telling him that it was a boy with green hair. All For One noting that is peculiar, telling Shigaraki that this was unforeseen, asking him to explain to him how this happened, having already had suspicions that he must have had access to One For All, because no other power should have given him the strength to do that. And as Shigaraki would explain what he saw, that he sent a projectile-like punch to the direction of the Nomu, All For One would immediately smile under his mask, telling Shigaraki that this was just one of many attempts, telling him that next time, they'll be better prepared. Turning to an incubation port, which would actually house a high-end Nomu, with us zooming back into Izuku's point of view, who would be watching as Aizawa would be taken into an ambulance and disappear. At this, Izuku would ask All Might if they're gonna continue classes, and All Might turning towards him would nod no, saying that likely they're gonna be needing a week, or at least Aizawa will, before doing a little bit of a chuckle. This is when Deku, nodding to All Might, would then ask him what they're gonna be doing during the week off. All Might saying that normally he'd say he'd be willing to train with him, but this week he has a little bit of things to do. already beginning to suspect that All For One in some way, somehow, was behind this entire operation. So with All Might doing a little bit of his due diligence to look into that, he would find out that more than likely that is the case. All the while we would zoom into Deku, who inside of Bakugo's room would be playing video games. Bakugo telling him that that move he used on the Nomu was pretty sick, having seen everything from his point of view, because just as Deku and Todoroki would have used on that combination attack, Bakugo would have actually arrived a few seconds after with his explosion quirk, only to see Deku reel his arm in front of the Nomu and blast it with a massive blue projectile that would actually send multiple pieces of it flying everywhere, asking Izuku how he managed that. While Izuku, in a bit of a cast, would tell Bakugo that he simply channeled all the power of the quirk into his arm, and he used that to enhance his already incredible quirk. Bakugo saying that it was a pretty smart idea, explaining that if he had the power of One For All, he bets his arms wouldn't even be able to handle the power of the explosions either, nodding to Deku and pretty much pointing out that he's still in a cast. But, I mean, luckily for him, he does have Recovery Girl's quirk, so he should be good in about 2 more days. Bakugo taking a moment to ask Izuku how he feels about having the number one hero's quirk and all. Deku turning to him as he would say, "You know, Bakugo, honestly, it's surreal. Sometimes I still can't believe that I have 2 quirks, you know? Isn't that kind of crazy to think about?" With Bakugo being like, "Don't rub it in, damn it," as he would say, "But yeah, it's pretty cool to think about. Just don't let that make you think you're stronger than me or something." Izuku raising an eyebrow as he would tease, "You care to find out?" Bakugo saying, "Thought you'd never ask," as both of them would jump cut from them playing Street Fighters to now literally fighting in the street. Us jump cutting to seeing Bakugo and Deku literally like fighting all across their entire block, because Bakugo would be trying to tag Deku with explosions, while Deku would be avoiding them, slipping, sliding, gliding, flying in the air and zipping from tree posts and lamp posts and walls and rooftops. They're going everywhere, and Bakugo's entire goal was to try to land a single explosion, all the while Deku, only having 3 arms, would be doing his best to keep up with Bakugo. But then on one turn when Deku normally would use his right arm, Deku would notice, "Damn, I forgot," as he wouldn't be able to grab onto anything, and Bakugo would land a massive explosion right in his stomach, sending Deku crashing onto the ground and be like, "Damn it, Bakugo, you mind holding back next time?" As Bakugo, pissed off, would say, "You mind not being so damn annoying?" With Deku laughing and saying that next time they'll have a little bit of a better fight, at least in 2 or 3 days. Bakugo saying, "We better." As the two would finally end up walking home, having actually gone a little bit further than their only neighborhood. Spotting a villain with an ice quirk who was currently using it similarly to Todoroki, them seeing that his hair was white as he was gliding through the city, and Bakugo would be like, "Is that Todoroki?" As Deku would say, "That's not," holding one hand out, noting that he was running away with a horde of cash. As he blasting a projectile towards his direction, he would send him crashing off his ice and onto the ground. A flame pillar of Endeavor flying right after the perpetrator, as hitting him last second, we would see Endeavor turning to the left, noting who would have actually shot that projectile. As going on to capture the villain, Endeavor would receive praises from the crowd, him knowing that it wasn't actually him who stopped it. Though in 2 more seconds it definitely would have been. Him turning to see Deku, who was no longer there, because he's more than smart enough to realize that he shouldn't have gotten involved. And as Deku and Bakugo would go home, the 2 of them would start laughing about how Deku already technically had his first bad guy incarceration. Deku laughing as he would look to Bakugo and say, "Actually, I think it's my second." Bakugo getting pissed off as he would say, "Don't flatter yourself. All Might's the only reason that I'm still standing, so don't go ahead and think that you take the credit." With Deku and Bakugo joking, and both of them diverting their paths, because now Deku actually had to walk home. That being said, a few more days would pass, and just like you would expect, the students would all find themselves back at UA, where they would be informed of the fact that they're still going to be having the UA Sports Festival. Deku getting excited as ever, because in the last event, let's just say he didn't exactly do too well. So honestly, Deku's excited to just show the rest of the class what he's really made out of. So with him actually being the one who got first place during the entrance exam, he would actually be told by midnight that he's going to be responsible for giving the opening speech. Deku getting extremely flustered is not really knowing what the heck he should say to a bunch of quirked superhumans and a crowd. Deku would sit there thinking about things, eventually thinking that, you know what, maybe just coming from the heart will be better. Him making his way to the podium the day of the UA Sports Festival, as moving stiff as ever, he would turn to see Bakugo laughing at him. And that would sort of give him encouragement, because he's not about to let Bakugo have another one-up on him. And so, making his way towards the top, Deku would go on to give a pretty mediocre speech, but hey, a speech nonetheless. And with that finally being finished, Midnight would be like, alright, well, with that speech out of the way, we can finally start the first event, which will be clicking a button to reveal like a wheel of just random events, as she would say, the obstacle course. With Deku hearing that and immediately getting a big bright smile on his face. Bakugo smacking him in the head as he would say, don't be so sure of yourself. You're not gonna win just because you win a couple of parkour events every other year. Deku smirking as he would say how much you want to put on that. Bakugo saying that he'll be a slave for a week if he somehow manages to win. As Deku would say, you're on. Telling him that as an added bonus, he won't even use that quirk. Royally angering Bakugo, who through gritted teeth would say, oh, so you're underestimating me, Deku. Before both of them would make their way to the starting line, and we would see a out for blood Bakugo at the start, just ready to start the race. The pistol gun blaring as Bakugo instantly flaring explosions at max power. He would actually hit some people behind him, causing them to fall backwards and get frozen in ice thanks to Todoroki, as Deku, knowing that that was going to happen, would already be flying towards the direction of the finish line. Bakugo and Deku being ahead of everybody else, as each of them encountering a zero-pointer, they would decide to handle things differently. Bakugo throwing a smoke screen so that the zero-pointer couldn't see him, and then flying right past him. All the while Deku would actually use the zero-pointer itself, its arm that actually tried swinging at him, to boost his momentum, gliding on the arm of it itself before using his projectile to blare off of it, getting a lead in front of Bakugo, showcasing an incredible level of finesse over his quirk. All the while somebody watching all the way in America would be stunned, having spit out a bowl of Cheerios in that moment, being like, is he using my quirk? All the while a pink-haired girl next to him would say, there's no way, you're just imagining it. Koichi watching on as he would say, wait, no, that's my quirk. Wow, I never expected it to do so well in a sports festival. Look at that, Pop. See, I would have done good if I would have gone to the hero course. Her smacking him across the head as she would say, that's someone else. And so what if he has your quirk? That doesn't mean anything. As continuing to watch Deku, he would have a big bright smile, seeing himself in the young boy and just thinking, he's only missing the All Might hoodie. All the while Deku in real time, flying ahead of Bakugo, would lead him to stop flying for a second as beginning to blare AP shots to the direction of Deku. Deku would be like, hey, no fair, they never said attacks were allowed. Bakugo stopping for a second as he would say, they didn't say they weren't, blaring off more AP shots as Deku would say, two can play that game, immediately starting to shoot a bunch of energy projectiles towards Bakugo, getting into a crazy aerial battle, which would give Todoroki just enough time to actually take over the lead from both of them, leaving both boys angered as they would call a truce momentarily and regain the lead. Todoroki getting angered is attempting to use an ice wall to freeze the two of them. It would only serve to give Deku an advantage, because Deku would slide and glide off of the ice, shooting a projectile backwards as he would gain an incredible lead, beginning to approach the minefield section, which he would clear by simply flying right on by it, using his quirk to blare projectiles from the back. As taking two massive leaps, Deku would manage to cross the finish line faster than Bakugo could have expected, leaving the boy completely pissed off, who glaring at Deku would simply agree to the terms and conditions that he set. Deku smiling as he would tell him that from now on, he's gonna call him number one for an entire week, pissing off Bakugo with the fact that that's the thing that he wanted. Oh, and he's gonna pay for his lunch. Bakugo practically beginning to explode like a piece of dynamite, with Deku noting that, hey, calm down, Dynamite, we don't exactly need you blowing a fuse. Some of Class 1A members beginning to laugh, as almost immediately the next event would be started, and it would be the cavalry race, which Izuku would be more than prepared for, having shown off that he didn't win by mere fluke, but he's actually fast, and really fast. So, getting a team would actually not be as hard as you would expect, and due to Deku and Bakugo being friends, I'd likely see the two being paired up, meaning that it just leaves two more members, and since Ida and Uraraka have sort of built a little bit of a friendship with these two, that would be the team that ends up being displayed. So, as they go into the event, Deku and Ida would be on the bottom, all the while Bakugo would be on the top, with Uraraka using her quirk to make everything weightless, making them move even faster than before. Deku using his quirk Slide and Glide to keep them nailed to the floor, as Ida would use his speed to keep them moving, alongside Deku of course, and Uraraka would pretty much have to hold on to Bakugo for dear life, life as to not fall off. And safe to say, this being an incredibly fast team that can zip and slide all over the place, there's no way that their million-point headband would be taken. So they end up coming out on top in the cavalry battle, and we're able to move on to the 1v1 fights, which for this timeline I'm actually going to be scrambling completely, meaning that Deku's first match in this timeline wouldn't be against Shinso and instead would actually be against Ibarra, who, in case you don't remember, is pretty much the girl who absolutely destroyed Kaminari by using her hair. So yeah, as Deku would make his way towards the ring, he would be waved at by a multitude of people who were actually already cheering at him becoming a class favorite, considering the fact that not only did he give the speech, get first place, but he's been doing pretty well, and he's been doing it by using a pretty flashy quirk. So as soon as he would get into the arena, he would watch on to see his opponent, thinking that he's not exactly a fan of hitting girls, so he'll try to take her out by a ring out, to which Ibarra would respond by immediately beginning the match by sending vines to his direction, forcing Izuku to get into some crazy game of tag where these vines are trying to kill him. And as Deku would dodge and dodge and dodge, eventually most of the arena would be covered by these vines, forcing Izuku to take up into the air, where Izuku, creating footholds for himself by using his quirk slide and glide, would begin to blast projectiles towards the direction of Ibarra, stunning her at how quickly he was literally taking them down. It was as if Deku had just taken a weed whacker and started cutting all of her vines. She would start freaking out, sending a horde of them to fly towards Izuku, who simply dodging them mid-air would then pull an Ultra Instinct Goku and glide on the vines themselves to actually close the gap between himself and Ibarra, blaring a projectile just strong enough to send her flying out of the arena. Her getting up slowly as reaching towards her stomach, she'd be like, ugh, seeing as, she had just spun thanks to that attack from Deku. And as Deku would look at that, he'd be like, oh, sorry, to which the crowd would respond by erupting into cheers, Deku smiling and waving at the crowd, all the while he would wonder who his next opponent is, looking at the bracket and noticing that it's probably going to be Todoroki, because Todoroki was actually going up against Mina. And it's not like Deku was trying to be mean, but they're just two different classes of fighters. So as Izuku would go to the waiting area and wait for the rest of his classmates to do their own battles, Deku would suddenly hear the sounds of two people talking in the hallway, and so going to check it out, Deku would notice that it was Todoroki and his father. He'd be wondering what the conversation was about. Todoroki glaring at his father as walking away angrily, he would leave Endeavor there angry as ever to just kind of watch him walk away, and as Deku would peek his head out of the room, Endeavor would stare at him going, You're the kid that interfered with my robbery incident the other day. Make sure to try to make yourself useful and get Todoroki to use his flames. Walking away angrily, as Deku would ask, why? Why does he want him to make him use his flames? Shouldn't that be Todoroki's choice? Endeavor glaring at him and telling him that it's none of his business, leaving Deku there to just wonder what the heck's wrong with that guy. And that must be the reason that Todoroki seems so cold all the time. Who wouldn't be with a father like that? So, as soon as his match against Todoroki would begin, Deku would be waiting for Todoroki to do the first thing that Izuku would expect, blasting a massive geyser at him, which immediately actually would happen, because Todoroki would try to end the battle off like that immediately, forcing Deku to use his quirk to latch onto the ice itself and glide up it, using the momentum and angle of the ice to actually fly down towards Todoroki, who, having already used his quirk to actually cover the entire or most of the arena in ice, would barely have an answer for Deku, creating a wall of ice in front of him, protecting himself from Izuku. However, Deku charging up a projectile and blasting it towards the ground would actually leap over that wall, Deku extending one hand out as he would say, gotcha, blasting a projectile that would force Todoroki to fight it by shooting his flames out at him, pushing the projectile back as before the flames could reach Deku, Todoroki would turn them off. Deku floating mid-air as he would ask, why'd you stop? Todoroki telling him that he has his reasons, beginning to actually lift one hand up trying to quit, but Deku would fly towards him, grabbing his arm and telling him to tell him why, before saying, it's because of your father, isn't it? That's why you don't use your quirk. Well, I won't accept this victory unless you go all out, pushing Todoroki backwards and telling him to try again. Watching on as the face of Todoroki would contort between anger and just confusion. This is when Todoroki would finally ask him why. He was already gonna win, why not just take the victory? And Deku would respond, because winning this match isn't what's important. I want you to be able to use your quirk freely, because at the end of the day, it's not his, it's yours. lighting a literal and metaphorical flame inside of Todoroki, who telling Deku that he asked for it would then send a flaming pillar to his direction, which Deku would dodge by flying in the air before then blaring multitude of projectiles towards the direction of Todoroki, flying in circles around him like a mini tornado, and actually beginning to move so fast that the flames didn't exactly have the potency, due to the fact that Deku was creating a vortex that stopped them from working as effectively as possible. Not completely snuffing them out because Deku's not that fast, but doing so pretty fast enough that it would mess with Todoroki's flames, ultimately leaving to Deku blasting a multitude of projectiles at Todoroki on some Haku style, who, throwing them from different directions, would then wear Todoroki down, who, having no answer for this ability of Deku's, would pretty much be taken out of the arena and just sort of accept his loss, turning to Deku and just nodding, with Deku doing so backwards. As Todoroki would exit the arena, Endeavor would actually yell at Todoroki that he shouldn't have lost that battle, leaving Todoroki to walk off angrily, with Deku yelling at Endeavor, "Shut up! Why don't you come down here and try to face me yourself?" Stunning every single person in the arena who'd be like, "Did he just say that?" A moment of silence would engulf as Endeavor would feel his flames getting hotter and hotter, and he would suddenly burst out in flames, leaving everyone watching in the stadium and at home to be like, he did not just do that. As Koichi and Popstep, both watching this and in their living room, would be like, he didn't just say that to Endeavor. Watching on in hopes that nothing would happen, with Endeavor just simply turning around and telling the kid to mind his tongue. This is when, making his way towards the area where he would likely meet All Might, they would have a little chat, which would likely result like the one that we get in the original, moving on to the next battle, which, ironically enough in this timeline, would actually be against Kaminari, who, due to the fact that his first opponent was Han Tesero, would mean that the battle would have actually played out in Kaminari's favor, at least that's what I think, because the moment that Sero would wrap him up in his tape, I could see Kaminari using a last-ditch effort and completely using all of his electricity quirk, with Sero telling him that his tape isn't that conductive, as he kind of just ends up getting fried by it anyways, and he would pass out, although while Kaminari would stand in the ring acting like a fool, and he would move on to the next battle, which would likely be against Shinso, and due to the fact that the previous person would have actually outed Shinso as to what his quirk is, I don't think Kaminari would say anything to him. I mean, he's not dumb enough to risk his opportunity at an easy win, and so, having recharged his electricity, he would destroy him, moving on to, like I said, the third match with Deku. And we would kick this entire match off with Kaminari using blasts of lightning to the direction of Deku, who would actually dodge them, taking into the sky, noting that Kaminari's range with his quirk is pretty limited, and so, using projectiles from the air in a similar fashion to how he defeated Todoroki, Izuku would wear down Kaminari just enough to the point where Kaminari was forced to exhaust himself and turn silly, and after that happened, it was just a matter of sliding him out of the arena. So yeah, Deku goes to the finals, where he would meet none other than Katsuki Bakugo. Because, I mean, come on now, let's be real. There's nobody else in this entire sports festival that could have actually contended with Bakugo. And due to that, we have two friends facing off at the center of the arena. Bakugo telling him that the last thing he wants is for him to hold back, and to use that little ability of his. Izuku smirking as he would tell him that he had no desires of doing that, immediately charging up 37% of full cowling, having spent the last week working on charging that energy through his body and getting himself right, as Deku lunging to the direction of Katsuki, would engage him in a hand-to-hand fight, where Deku would show off the martial arts skills that he would have actually picked up during the years, doing a little bit of martial arts on the side, and blocking all of Bakugo's explosions, redirecting the blast, forcing Bakugo to get pissed off, and fighting completely unnaturally, throwing kicks, spinning elbows, and random blare explosions at Deku's face, which would serve to block his field of vision. But due to Deku having faced Bakugo for all these years, he could somewhat predict what Bakugo was gonna do, and he's gotten accustomed to taking explosions to the face. So both of them going at it at the center of the ring in a similar fashion to the Katsuki versus Kirishima fight, they would put on a real show. That is, until Deku would finally decide to create some distance and blare a projectile at Bakugo, who, shooting back with a couple of AP shots, we would watch smoke begin to rise. Bakugo taking the opportunity to blast to the direction of Deku, channeling a howitzer impact, as Deku, having charged up the energy for just 6 seconds, would blare it right at the direction of Bakugo, both hands meeting at the center, as Bakugo's hand would be blown back, and he, along with his quirk blast, would be sent flying out of the arena. Deku having won definitively, standing in the center of it with a little bit of battle damage, as Bakugo on the ground would sort of just reflect on the fact that that quirk just it completely made their competitions, well, not a competition. Because it's clear as day now to him that they're just not in the same ballpark anymore, no matter how much he didn't want to admit it. And so walking away as Deku would put both hands into the air celebrating the fact that he just won the UA Sports Festival, Bakugo would be in the waiting area, not helping but feeling some sort of way. Us eventually skipping to the next day at school, where they would all be informed of two things. One, they need to pick their hero names, and two, they actually need to pick who they're going to be interning with. And as Deku would go through the list of the people who he could intern with, Deku would see the name of a hero who Izuku had actually been told about by Aizawa, the Skycrawler, a hero out of the US, which would shock everybody because a lot of them didn't have a lot of internship opportunities coming out of the US. So Aizawa turning to Izuku and kind of like smiling or like, no, heck no, because I would never smile. He would just kind of like do like a lifeless nod. We would see Deku nod back as he would think to himself that that's a pretty good choice to go with. I mean, after all, their quirks are pretty similar. So, deciding that there's no question about it, Izuku would opt to go with Koichi, the Skycrawler. All the while he would now have to be tasked with picking his name, and he would choose the aerial hero, Accelerate, a name that he personally thinks suits him due to the fact that a lot of his quirk and the fighting style that he has is all about speed, and namely acceleration. A name that when he would go to the front of the class, Midnight would be all over it, saying that that's an incredible name. Uraraka saying that it's pretty cool too, as Izuku, having finally chosen on that, Izuku would watch on, questioning what Bakugo decided to pick. Him showing him the whiteboard as it would say, Dynamite. Deku laughing as he would say, no way you picked that nickname I gave you. Bakugo being like, I didn't pick that nickname because of you. I picked it because All Might's my favorite hero. And my quirk's an explosion, so you could call it Dynamite. So don't go flattering yourself, Deku. Him making his way towards the front of the class and showcasing it to everybody who would think that that's actually a pretty sick hero name. And so, with that finally being over, Deku would now have the entire nighttime to pack his things and board his plane because he's going to be needing to make his way towards the US. Arriving at a small hero agency, which Koichi actually would have just started last year, where Izuku would meet the receptionist, a girl with pink hair. Him introducing himself as Izuku Midoriya, with her saying, oh, don't worry, I know exactly who you are. Koichi's going to be ready to see you. Calling out to him, who would pull up and be like, I'm the Skycrawler. Deku being like, hey, nice to meet ya. With Koichi taking off his mask and saying that he saw his performance at the sports festival. It was incredible. He was like, wham, wham, blah, 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 blah. And even that part where he was like this, performing his quirk inside of the small office, being like, that was so cool. Deku saying, wait, we really do have the same quirk, don't we? As he would start doing the exact same thing that the Skycrawler does and being like, there's no way, what are the odds? I mean, you'd expect that from lightning quirks or fire quirks or even water quirks. I mean, those are not common, but it's more likely for them to have duplicates. But a quirk like this, it's so incredible, both of them would say. All the while Popstep looking to him would say, now Koichi, what is it exactly that you're planning on teaching this young man? Koichi being like, oh, right, so what I'm going to be teaching you at the agency is how to run the place. Deku being like, really? I thought we'd maybe go on some hero patrol. Him saying that they could do that, but first, let's take a few days to learn how to run a hero agency. Saying that honestly, that was the hardest part for him. Izuku laughing as he would be like, I'm serious. I was under Captain Celebrity for so long that when I finally opened my agency, I didn't know what was what. It's only thanks to Popstep over here that I was able to figure things out. Her running to his arm and being like, yep, and ever since then, we've been the dynamic duo. Izuku asking if he has any sort of sidekicks or anything like that, and Koichi saying that he does, they never show up on time. When suddenly, a giant mantis-looking dude and two guys that transform into like grasshopper things would enter the building. Characters which honestly you guys won't know unless you've actually seen My Hero Vigilantes. You would know them just from watching season 2, but if you've actually read the manga, you would know even more, which, not to brag, but I own the manga. Yeah, I know. Start the praise. Let me know how cool I am down below in the comments because, manga reader over here. But no, jokes aside, after this would take place, Izuku and Koichi would begin to get to know each other, him beginning to teach him the ins and outs of actually owning an agency, as eventually, after one day would finally pass, Izuku and Koichi on top of the building would then begin to talk about what it was like awakening their quirks. Koichi going on to explain that as a kid, apparently his mom says he used to fly around, him saying that I guess it's actually true now, since he would start using his quirk to show Deku that he could do the same thing he can. Actually, not to the same extent, because The way his quirk functions is slightly differently, due to the fact that mainly Deku has the power of One for All, which changed its essence a little bit more. And Deku would say, that's sick! So you're able to generate it from your hands and legs? Well, watch this. Generating the power from every single part of his body, much like how Captain Celebrity does. Koichi being incredibly impressed and saying, your quirk's fantastic! You know, to tell you the truth, when I became a hero, I didn't exactly do it the right way. Truth be told, I used to be a vigilante down in Naruhara, but after practically getting kicked out of the US, I came down here with Captain Celebrity, and I've loved it so far. Pop Step, all my friends, all the people that I've gotten to save, it's really cool. Honestly, I wish I could have gone to UA or a hero school for that matter, but if I'm being honest, seeing you down there at the sports festival using a quirk so similar to mine, it made it feel like I was living out my dream through you. Deku saying, you're telling me, it feels like I'm already a hero when I look at you. With Koichi and Deku talking and laughing up on the roof, until finally Koichi would end up holding a box and telling him that he has an incredible gift for him, handing him a signed All Might hoodie, a special, very, very limited edition one, which Deku would see and be like, you're kidding! No way! I thought these were sold out! All Might hasn't dropped this line in, exactly the amount of time. Stunning Koichi who'd be like, wait, you know that? As Deku would say, who wouldn't? I'm a super All Might fan! Koichi being like, oh, that's so cool! You just keep getting better every minute! Pop Step arriving and smacking him over the head as she would say, he's here so that you could teach him how to be a hero, not so you could find a new friend. With Koichi being like, why can't he be both? Deku laughing as he would turn towards Pop Step and say, never really got to know you too well, holding out a hand. Pop Step accepting it as she would say, now that you put that hoodie on, you do look a lot more like Koichi than I thought. Apologizing to Koichi who would say, you see? All the while Deku in the background would be fixing up the hoodie for himself and use his quirk. Pop Step looking at him as she would say, Koichi, he really does. Koichi smiling as she would say, you sure you haven't had some long lost son or something like that? And he would say, Pop Step, now you're just being silly. At this point, Koichi would go on to turn towards Izuku and ask how Aizawa's been doing, saying that he heard he did become a UA teacher and from what he hears, he's his teacher. Izuku saying, oh right, Aizawa, yeah, I mean, he's a great teacher. He teaches them everything that they need to know, but he's kind of a no-nonsense type of guy. Koichi being like, yeah, that's about what I remember, though he is the coolest. Izuku nodding as at this point, Koichi would say, alright, well that's enough of that. Look, you want to go out on a hero patrol, right? Why don't we do that? The two of them immediately jumping out of the rooftop and gliding in the nearby skyscrapers because Koichi's agency would actually be in New York. So as they would be up there gliding from rooftop to rooftop, Izuku double jumping, showing off how much cooler his evolved quirk of, slide and glide is, Koichi would be getting so freaking jealous, being like, you're so cool! Just like glazing Deku the whole time, until eventually, thanks to them leaping from rooftop to rooftop, Izuku would make perfect eye contact with the villain, who was currently setting up a couple of bombs. Izuku stopping midair as Koichi would ask what's wrong, Deku pointing as the villain would immediately take off, running into the building and trying to hide among the massive crowd that was there. And strangely enough, it was actually one of those crazy looking ballroom parties. The kind that have masks. So once they were inside, after having finally caught up to him in like 2 seconds, they would look around and be like, that's not good. Koichi immediately being like, everybody, you need to get off this floor, it's gonna explode. The crowd immediately going into pandemonia as everybody just starts freaking out, like everyone for themselves, and we suddenly see a man hold out a remote in front of Deku, clicking the button as the entire top floor would start blowing up, leaving Izuku and Koichi to like pretty much slide towards nearby people and get them out of the way of the falling rubble. All the while with their other hand, they would be shooting projectiles towards the direction of the rubble, making it small enough so that if it did fall on somebody, it wouldn't kill them at the bare minimum. And with the tragedy being avoided, at least any major deaths, the two heroes would watch on as he would run out the top door, same one that he had actually entered the room with, and Koichi and Deku both following after him would tell him that it's the end of the line. Koichi aiming his hand towards him as threatening to shoot a projectile, the villain would suddenly have 2 wings sprout out from his back, him telling him that if they want him, they'll have to catch him. Him immediately flying off towards the sky, but before that could even happen, Izuku would blast a projectile at the ground, then double jump and blast it out outwards behind him much like Bakugo has, thinking that this is as good a time as any to test this, and as the blast would go out from behind his hands, Izuku could feel a significant recoil in his arms, but it didn't really matter, because next thing he knew, Deku basically was pile driving the villain into a nearby rooftop, all the while Koichi would get run by and put on some quirk dampening cuffs. After that would happen, the villain would tell them that his plan was foolproof. He was finally gonna get back at those executives that robbed them of his money. Koichi asking what he's talking about, him saying that they have no idea. All those people in that room aren't what you think they are. They're monsters! I'm telling you, they're monsters! They robbed me of my research, and all I wanted was to get my revenge. But don't you worry, because I'll get out of jail, and when I do, I'll come after you for stopping me. Izuku and Koichi looking towards each other, as Koichi would say, well then you can come for the Skycrawler Agency. Anytime, any day, pal. Taking the villain into custody, where the two would be awarded commission for having finished that mission. And because Koichi's, nice as a guy as ever, he would actually give Deku a significant check. The pretty much internship rest of it not really going as, crazy as you would expect, because the only other things that they would actually end up stopping would basically be more or less the types of things that Koichi was up to in Naruhara, like stopping random petty fights, catching, a criminal that would rob a convenience store, and little things like that. So with Deku having a new appreciation for the smaller heroes that, aren't really too crazily recognized and are more willing to do the little things, Izuku would think that maybe that's the kind of hero he wants to be. The kind of guy that the little guys can count on whenever they're in danger. And just like that, his internship opportunity would be over. Izuku boarding back to a plane towards Japan, where arriving back in his city, Izuku would receive word that Ida, his classmate, was actually injured gravely during his internship. Everybody finding out about this with more details the next day in class, were all of them saddened by the fact that their classmate Ida was going to be needing to undergo surgery that likely was going to take him out of the hero program for at least a year if he's able to even become a hero again. All of them would be saddened, though all visiting him after school would be over. They would all cry, some of them would laugh, they'd crack a couple of jokes, and Ida would apologize for having failed them as class rep, saying that he wants to delegate that job to Izuku Midoriya. Izuku being like, wait, why me? As he would say, Izuku, nobody else can fulfill the role of class rep like you can. You're smart and you have all the qualities of a leader. Today I showed that I was not very much so fit for that role. But you, Izuku, you can do that better than I ever could. Izuku being like officially named the new rep, with everybody being like, look at the new class rep. Them all being like, he's just missing glasses. As you know, they end up having a nice little time. And Ida would basically end up having the surgery happen, which would be fortunate for him because normally he should die, but because I don't want to put a hamper on the pacing of the story, I'm just going to say he just got injured, Stain thought he killed them, and he dipped. Anyways though, with that arc being out of the way, we now are able to get into the final exams arc, which would play out pretty interestingly due to the fact that in this timeline, Deku and Bakugo are friends, meaning that that whole conflict that they had in the original won't really exist, though the two of them would have different ways of wanting to win. Just like you would expect, Deku would be more inclined to racing out of there since he still views All Might as someone that he can't beat, saying that he's still not there with this quirk, but Bakugo would say that they need to at least try, saying that their last resort could maybe be Deku running away, but definitely not the first. Izuku turning to Bakugo as nodding, the two of them would make their way into the city grounds looking for All Might, him landing in like a superhero-esque style, as he would say, looking for me. This would lead both Izuku and Bakugo to get on guard, all the while All Might would lunge directly at Bakugo and slam his knee into his stomach, then grabbing him by the face and slamming him on the ground, staring deathly to the direction at Izuku, who would watch on as Bakugo, though muffled because All Might's hand was still on his face, he'd say, "Get off me!" blasting an explosion square to the face of All Might at full power, recoil going through his arms, as Deku holding out both arms and shooting a massive projectile to the direction of All Might would say what he said, blasting All Might backwards, who wiping at his chest would remark that this match might be a little more entertaining than he thought. Rushing to Deku, who immediately outmaneuvering All Might and dodging all of his attacks, would play kind of like a cat and mouse game, running away from All Might all the while blasting mini projectiles at him as he does that, similarly to what Koichi does in the final fight of Vigilantes, as All Might eventually slamming his fist right next to Deku and having him cornered nearby an alleyway, he would ask Izuku where he plans to run, up, down, regardless of where, he'll have to face him. Bakugo appearing out of nowhere and screaming, "Get your head out of the clouds, Deku!" Sending a full-powered explosion from his gauntlet right at All Might's face, who tanking the blast would look slightly irritated, all the while Deku from behind him would have shot projectiles at the ground and let himself fly up. Watching from the air, as All Might grabbing onto both of Bakugo's arms, he would force him to smash both gauntlets into each other, snapping them as he would toss him in through a building wall, turning to Deku and lunging at him, fists hurled backwards. All the while Deku, who would have been simply watching on, though he wasn't really just doing that, would have actually charged up energy in one arm, reeling back as clashing All Might fist with fist, small hand against massive bulky hand, Izuku would actually overpower All Might entirely, blowing his arm back similarly to what he would have done to Bakugo in the sports festival and sending All Might crashing through like 7 buildings. Deku looking at his hand after the fact and wondering where the heck he got that power from, realizing that in that moment, Deku had actually tapped into about 50% of One For All and had even pushed his quirk beyond its natural limits, because that blast was unlike anything that Deku's used before, even against the Nomu. Us zooming into All Might, who inside of the building looking at his arm, which was now purple, it would resemble the arm that he had when he was facing All For One in Kamino. Deku turning towards Bakugo as they would run out the gate passing, Nezu being incredibly impressed, with the students wondering why All Might just gave up, them not actually knowing that All Might didn't give up. He straight up got beat. All Might having to actually be taken to Recovery Girl covertly, as the students would say that the way that they passed was incredible, noting that most of them are actually gonna get to go to the forest training camp. Aizawa coming and spoiling the truth, that is, that all of them are gonna be going, but the failures are gonna be taking extra courses, meaning that it's gonna be hell for them. As a smile would appear on his face, and he would take a moment to nod to Izuku, kind of letting him know that he's impressed by his performance since he's actually one of the people who's informed of what really happened. And so, with that being the case, the students would begin the forest training camp. All finding themselves inside of a bus as traveling through this massive forest. They would all be taking their time taking pictures, looking around, talking about their experiences. Momo saying that this place actually looks like one of the islands that they own, going on to explain that though the trees on their island are a bit more green. Everybody being like, just how much money do you have? As Momo would say, well, it's not my money, it's my parents. All the while Rock would be standing behind her being like, give me your life. And we would have Deku looking out the window just smiling, thinking about how much growing he can do here, and also having a little bit of a flashback to All Might telling him that thanks to that little performance during the, heroes versus villains little thing that they took as a final exams, he was not actually going to be able to go because his arm was actually healing. And when Deku profusely apologized and be like, I'm so sorry, All Might, I had no idea I was going to hurt you, All Might would laugh, be like, ha ha, young man, I'm excited to know that you're already surpassing me. You're a first year in UA. You should be proud of yourself. Holding on to him is like he goes blood red, and that ends the flashback. But anyways, as the students would finally make their way towards the edge of a cliff, they would overlook and see the building that they actually need to go to, noting that that's significantly far away. The teacher saying that that's the point, as they would all be sent over the railing and land on the ground. Mandalay telling them that they're going to be needing to face off against a couple of monsters. Oh, and to get there before 12 or else they won't be eating. All the students looking around as they would realize, we're screwed. Well, at least everybody but the people who could actually fight. Because Todoroki, Bakugo, Deku, they would be ready for anything. In fact, they'd be excited to destroy these mud monsters. And so, with Class 1A facing off against Pixie Bob's golems, they eventually arrived towards where the Pussycats are, and they would have their nice little lunch, spending the entirety of the week doing the typical training that they would normally, as Deku would spend a brunt of his training actually working alongside Tiger, who would teach Deku more moves to use in physical hand-to-hand combat, and would actually show Deku that he could use his projectiles in an actual fight in such an interesting way. Fighting against opponents and not only dodging by repelling their attacks, which Deku had already learned how to do, but actually retracting their attacks. Because imagine that somebody was about to throw like a straight right at you, and you were able to like hold out your palm, and all of a sudden their arm was dragged towards it. So all of a sudden there's like a big gap that you can actually take to exploit. You can go towards their ribs, you could go towards their face, or you could just outright blast them and they're not really able to protect themselves too much. So Deku would practice that move on Tiger, who after 3 shots would be completely out of it, deciding that that's not even worth fighting. Izuku learning that not only could he attract that towards his hand, but towards his body. Say there's a specific body part that Deku wants them to specifically aim for, he could force them to aim towards that direction by simply dragging them by using his quirk, which he can actually use on his full body to drag towards there, not only his hands and feet, which would be really freaking interesting. Though of course, this move doesn't really work on like heavy hitting like characters who have like super strength. Like somebody like of Tiger strength level, it'll work. But say it's somebody like All Might, somebody like All For One, somebody like even Muscular or a Nomu, high-end Nomu, it's not going to be working on them. This is more street thug level villainy stuff. And so as Deku would finish his training with Tiger, suddenly Aizawa would arrive, asking Izuku to face him. Izuku getting thoroughly destroyed by Aizawa, who would tell Izuku that he's good for his age, but he still lacks combat experience, telling Deku to get back up, as he would tell him of course he feels that way. He just took away his quirk. Aizawa telling him that he's going to be needing to get used to facing off against people with unfair abilities, unfair matchups. That's just something you're going to have to deal with, kid. So you either learn in school, or you learn out there where someone's life could be on the line. Deku getting back up as he would say, alright, let's do it again. Aizawa beating him up over and over again. With Izuku getting bloodied and battered, not like too much obviously, like right, like Aizawa would land a couple hits on his face, couple blows on his stomach, and Deku, like, you know, it looks like he got beat up a bit, but not like a crazy amount, right? Aizawa's not bloodthirsty or anything like that. So, with the day being over, Deku would definitely be feeling it, as all the students would be in the hot springs, them all enjoying a nice bath, until suddenly Mineta would start freaking out trying to climb over to the girls' side, being like, rules are meant to be broken, leaving Koda to stop him and once again fall off the railing after he sees the girls. And Izuku, being who he is, would end up blitzing towards there and grabbing onto Koda, taking him straight towards Mandalay, who would end up thanking him for the fact that he saved her, you know, her nephew, I believe it is? Yeah, nephew. She would then go on to tell him the story about Koda and his parents, why he acts the way that he does, and because Izuku would feel bad for him, this would once again lead him to likely following after Koda when he would disappear. So Deku would follow after the kid with a bowl of curry, asking Koda if what's wrong. Koda getting angry at him and being like, get lost, I don't need your help. As you know, Izuku leaving the bowl right next to him, he would leave, just kind of like staring at Koda and seeing that he was crying. And as Deku would finally decide that, you know, if Koda doesn't want to talk, then he doesn't have to, he would suddenly hear the sounds of footsteps nearing, Izuku wondering who the heck that was. Gaining a decent distance point, as seeing Muscular finally taking off his cape, he would end up turning to Koda, saying, huh, looks like I've got a little appetizer before I start killing some hero students. Asking him what his name is, saying that he always likes to cherish his victims. Koda being terrified because not only is this a random villain who's about to clearly kill him, but it's the same person who killed his parents. And as soon as Muscular would lift his arm in an attempt to smash Koda, Deku aiming a projectile directly towards his hand would send it flying at Muscular, redirecting the angle of his blow. As Deku blitzing on in there, grabbing Koda and leaving like the blue energy of his quirk behind, Muscular would spot this, saying, interesting. So it looks like I didn't get so lucky after all. Tell you what, kid. You let me kill that kid you're over there trying to protect, and I might just let you live. Izuku staring at him with eyes filled with determination as he would tell Koda that he needs to get out of there. Koda's legs just freezing in that moment as Deku would tell him, Koda, now! Leaving the young boy to get up and run away scared, as Muscular, immediately growing in size, would smash at the ground, something that Deku wasn't expecting, grabbing at a stone and tossing it as fast as he could at Deku, Izuku blasting a projectile to redirect it, as Muscular immediately punching to the direction of Deku would force him to have to use the new tactics taught to him by Tiger, but it wouldn't work. So though Muscular wouldn't hit his intended target, which was his face, Muscular still would have actually ended up hitting one of his shoulders, dislocating it, with Deku being shocked because in that moment he just froze up. Why? He didn't freeze up fighting against All Might, but this guy's bloodlust, it was making him tense, not even being capable of finishing that thought before Muscular would start throwing a rampage of blows that Deku now has to start dodging as fast as he can. Muscular getting pissed off at the fact that he was just playing a game of cat and mouse, he would tell him, you know kid, you're the type of people I hate fighting the most. Y'all, this running away is making me bored. What do you say we play a game? I try to catch the kid and you try to stop me. Turning his attention towards the direction of Koda and feinting to run, as Izuku say, wait, no! Suddenly, Muscular turning around and grabbing at Izuku's neck, he would slam him onto the wall of the mountain, asking, any last words? As Deku in that moment would realize Muscular was just playing him, and he fell into his trap. He's an idiot, he would think. Izuku would be like, as Muscular would be like, no, nothing? Then I guess it's lights out, kid. Enlarging his right arm and going to send it crashing towards Deku. But before he could do anything, Deku waving his feet towards the chest of Muscular would send off repulsion blast so powerful that it would send Muscular flying off the mountain cliff, unconscious mind you. Just that blast alone took him out, but because Deku in that moment was pissed off, he would then kick off the mountainside just like you would do if you're swimming and like you kick off the pool water, like increase your speed. As lunging to the direction of Muscular, Izuku, using his good left arm, would reel it back, charging 40% of One For All as he would send his fist crashing into the stomach of Muscular, sending him flying into the ground with a crater. As Izuku, flying over the mountaintop, would breathe heavily, asking if Muscular had any last words. Not really saying that because he killed him in case there's some confusion, but more so saying that as like a, like trying to like mock what Muscular had said. Because Muscular had underestimated Deku, thinking him to be weak, all the while Deku had overestimated Muscular, just looking at those muscles and tensing up when he shouldn't have. Because in reality, Deku, with the amount of One For All that he already had in his possession, could have straight up gone toe to toe with Muscular at 40% and straight up beat him in just a brawl of straight up muscles. But hey, I guess lesson learned. After this would happen, Deku would go towards the direction of where Koda would be at, since it would have just been a few seconds since the battle had started that Izuku, would have had that happen, and catching up to Koda, Izuku would pick him up and fly towards the direction of Aizawa, telling him that he met a villain in the forest, he took care of him, but he thinks there's more. Izuku noting that there is, because there would be a villain made entirely of mush right next to Aizawa's feet. Izuku asking if he killed someone. Aizawa saying that that's not likely. Seems like somebody can make clones. Deku flying into the air is noting that his classmates are still in the forest. Izuku would rush in there trying to find as many of them as possible to help them. Not to fight alongside them, but to get them out of there. So with Deku flying into the sky taking off, he would quickly spot that Tokiyami was going haywire with his quirk. Izuku immediately making the connection that his quirk must be going haywire because it's darkness. And so, flying down closer to Tokiyami's range, Izuku would begin shooting projectiles to the direction of Tokiyami's dark shadow, in an attempt to drive his attention away from him, doing so successfully as Dark Shadow would begin chasing after Deku, who, thinking of a plan to use Tokiyami's Dark Shadow for good things, he would begin gliding throughout the ground, all the while Dark Shadow would rampage through the forest until Izuku finally arriving next to Todoroki and Bakugo. He would watch on as Dark Shadow would grab onto Moonfish, smash him onto the ground like he was a freaking toddler, and then throw him into a tree completely unconscious, all the while Deku would scream out, "Todoroki! Use your quirk!" With him doing just that, and Tokiyami finally regaining control of Dark Shadow, him returning to the timid form, as Tokiyami finally breathing a sigh of relief would say, "Thank you. I thought I was gonna lose it and hurt Shoji worse." Izuku turning to Shoji, who finally having arrived, having chased after both Deku and Tokiyami, as we now would see the students all finally grouped up together and talking amongst themselves about what's going on. Todoroki noting that it must be the same people who've attacked them the previous times. Deku saying that it has to be, but so far he hasn't seen a single one of the same villains. Bakugo finally interrupting and saying regardless of who it is, they need to take them down and fast. They should split up and find them. Deku saying that that's a bad idea. Split up, one of these villains could take them out. To try to remember the incident with the Nomu, that thing was so strong it took everything out of Deku to defeat it. Bakugo understanding that Deku was referencing One For All. So finally having understood that they shouldn't split it up, they would make their way throughout the forest. Izuku gliding in the air is getting a better point of view than everybody else. Izuku would note what would be happening between Toga, Tsuyu, and Uraraka, flying down towards that direction as he would get in between Uraraka and Tsuyu, holding one hand out while gripping his wrist, telling Toga that if she moves, he fires. Toga's face immediately changing to one of disgust and anger as she would say, "And why did you have to get involved?" Putting her knife away and saying that she's not a fool, beginning to run away. As Deku would see this, Izuku would turn to ask if Uraraka and Tsu were okay. Spotting the group of classmates nearing him, as Izuku would say, "Wait, where's Bakugo? The class all looking around at themselves as they would say, he was just here. Deku immediately taking out to the air, as frantically looking in every direction, Izuku would spot him, Mr. Compress, and so flying off towards his direction, Izuku would flare off multiple projectiles at his direction, who simply, using marbles filled with rubble that he's had just in case, he would counter every single blow that Deku was throwing at him. Mr. Compress telling him that his quirk is impressive, but when it comes to the chase, he's the master. Deku closing in on Mr. Compress, almost about to get the marbles, as a beam of flames would be erected towards Izuku, him dodging out of the way and staring at Dabi, who right next to the portal that Kurogiri had would confirm the suspicions that these were the same villains from last time. Izuku asking him to give Kachan back, why they want him so bad, with Mr. Compress saying, we could ask you the same question. A portal opening right next to him, as Izuku, unwilling to let these villains get away with his best friend, saying to hell with any rules or regulations, Deku would blast projectiles behind his back as flying to the direction of the portal in with Mr. Compress, Izuku would arrive inside with Bakugo and the League of Villains. Deku getting into a fighting stance as the villains surrounding him would ask Izuku what he intends to do. Toga crying out, can we keep him? He's kinda cute. Bakugo asking, why the hell did you follow after me, Deku? With Deku tensing up as Bakugo would watch on as Shigaraki was getting closer, Izuku aiming a projectile at him as charging it up and having a bunch of energy that looks like a rainbow and blue energy swirl around him, Izuku would tell Shigaraki that if he takes one step closer, he'll eviscerate him. Every single trace of his existence will be gone. Shigaraki staring and smiling. Doesn't seem very heroic now, does it, hero? He just threatened to kill me. For what? For trying to make friends? Looking to the direction of Deku as he would say, you know, the reason we captured your buddy over here is because it felt like he was on the wrong team. He's brash, he's rude, he's arrogant. Seems to me like he might suit the villain side better. Wouldn't you agree? Izuku staring at him as rage would fill his eyes and he'd scream out, don't talk about Bakugo like that. Him telling him that he's a monster. Shigaraki saying that they're both monsters. You're willing to kill me after all, and that's not exactly heroic, wouldn't you say? Deku gritting his teeth as aiming his hand towards him he would say, I'm warning you, before Bakugo suddenly, lunging out knowing that Deku had so much seriousness in those words, would blast an explosion to the face of Shigaraki, sending him flying backwards, with the hand falling from his face as Dabi would aim his hand to Bakugo and shoot a pillar of flames, Bakugo narrowly managing to avoid it as that corner of the room would now fully be charred. With Deku and Bakugo now directly next to each other, Izuku looking to Bakugo as nodding, Bakugo aiming one hand to the sky would blow the roof off, as Deku blasting projectiles out to the ground and grabbing onto Bakugo's arm with his other, he would fly them out of there. However, the rooftop would be replaced with a portal, Shigaraki crying out, Kurogiri, stop them! As the portal will teleport them back into the room. Shigaraki now being free to grab his hand as placing it on his face, he would tell the two boys that they're not going anywhere, and if they think that they can somehow escape them with Dabi, Toga, Mr. Compress, Kurogiri, and Magma, well, they have something else coming. Turning to Izuku as he would ask, just how exactly do you plan on paying me back for that roof, huh? Deku barking back that the only one paying will be Shigaraki for all his crimes. Having clicked the button on his All Might hoodie, which actually would have had a tracking device that Koichi would have installed a long time ago, in case he ever got into trouble. And as Popstep would be checking her computer, she would suddenly see a ding going, Koichi, you're here, right? Koichi being like, yeah, I'm at the agency. Her saying, one of your hoodies is marking the danger. Koichi and Popstep both realizing, Izuku! This is when they would immediately call Aizawa, or at least Koichi would, going on to tell him that his student's in danger, sending him the exact coordinates, as Aizawa would thank him, immediately sending this to the police and All Might, who finally having been healed along with a bunch of other massive pro heroes, would end up ambushing the area about 8 minutes later. With Izuku and Bakugo meanwhile that time, having basically been strapped to chairs and been given an offer to join the villain side, telling them all the reasons why hero society is flawed, with Deku blatantly refusing and Bakugo doing a bit of the same, saying that each of them would rather die. Shigaraki placing his hands directly on the face of Izuku, as not placing his thumb, he would say, you know kid, I really only need your friend over here, so if I want to kill you then I just might, when suddenly the voice of All For One would ring out from the TV, Tomura, take your hands off the boy, I need him for something. Shigaraki being like, "But master, we don't need him." All for One calling out, "I need him, Tomura. Now let go." Shigaraki just being like, "Fine." This is when, walking away, he would tell them that they're idiots, that they'll just die here unless they join the villain side. Bakugo saying that that'll just be fine with them. As out of nowhere, All Might's fist would come crashing through the wall of that building, and Kamui Woods would send a multitude of lacquered chain prisons to capture a multitude of the villains. Gran Torino immediately blitzing at the direction of Kurogiri and knocking him out, as one of the heroes nearby would loosen the restraints put on Deku and Bakugo, both of them asking how they can help. All Might saying that the best way they can do that is by getting out of here. So as Izuku would smile to All Might and both boys would be about to leave the area, this is when suddenly a black liquid would cover all of them, teleporting to a nearby warehouse where Shigaraki would say, "Master, you saved us once again." And All for One would tell Shigaraki he has, leaving him to walk to the direction of Deku and telling him that he's fascinated by his quirk. It reminds him a lot of a hero from the US called the Skycrawler. However, there's something interesting about his quirk. It seems to have the same properties of another hero, All Might, revealing to the villains that he was the successor of All Might, who turning to him would begin laughing, but All for One wouldn't laugh, telling them that if they underestimate this boy, it might just be the last thing they ever do. Walking closer to Izuku and placing his hand on his head, attempting to take the quirk one for all, as suddenly the vestiges inside of Deku that hadn't reacted due to the fact that Deku already had a quirk factor would finally do so, fighting back against All for One, who in the dream realm will tell him that this boy's quirk was not going anywhere. Izuku standing behind them in vestige form, as suddenly being taken back to the real world, Izuku would now have the memories of the previous users all hitting him at once, him staring at All for One as his eyes would narrow, and he would blast a projectile to the chest of All for One, who being pushed back would leave Shigaraki and the rest of the villains to immediately use their quirks on Deku. However, the hand of All for One would stop them, telling them that this is a battle meant for All for One and One for All. Tendrils flying out of his hands as seeking Deku like homing missiles, they would chase him. However, Deku punching at them and shattering them, he would then use his left hand to aim projectile beams towards the direction of All for One, blasting beams of energy that wouldn't hit him thanks to All for One using barrier quirks. And with this full-scale battle roaring on, Izuku suddenly would feel the users of One for All telling him how to use his quirk to charge up energy in his core, all the while simultaneously using his arms and legs to divert directions, moving like Gran Torino. Izuku having the memories of Gran Torino thanks to All Might, and then beginning to actually zip around the room just like that, All for One looking around as he would ask when that old man got the chance to teach him that. Blasting a lightning quirk to the direction of Deku, who would actually have left an afterimage in that moment, the power of One for All spiraling with his quirk and beginning to finally completely merge, Izuku's body beginning to glow in a radiant blue energy as he would clash with All for One, who having amalgamated a multitude of quirks in the other arm, would fist clash against Izuku, pushing him back as Bakugo, unwilling to just watch Deku fight this battle on his own, would blast towards that direction, launching a massive howitzer impact as the villain All for One would laugh, the building being destroyed around them as it would push back the League of Villains members, alerting the heroes who seeing the battle damage nearby would fly off, All Might arriving momentarily afterwards as he would be greeted to the sight of All for One being blown backwards. A surge of energy having overcome the Izuku in that moment, him pushing past his quirk farther than he ever has before. The users of All for One all placing their hands alongside Deku, kind of similar to what happened with the Goku and Father Kamehameha moment, as Bakugo would have been sent flying to the side, having not been capable of keeping up, with Deku's hoodie being completely torn from the sleeve, and All for One being sent crashing, mass shattering and arm destroyed. As All Might would land nearby, he would walk over towards All for One, telling him that this battle is done, while Izuku would stand there nearly falling over, arm in perfect condition, and Bakugo looking up from the ground having just been involved in that scuffle, swearing that he could see All Might standing there for a second, for his vision would finally lock in, and he would see that it was just Deku. But nonetheless, after this interaction would finally happen, the villains would all be taken to custody, and I do mean every single one. Meaning that in this timeline, the villains won't be having a single chance at breaking out, due to the fact that All For One won't be having his failsafe. The only thing that he could potentially rely on would be the Doctor, and because in the original story the heroes would still find his base and find out about Dr. Ujiko, I have no real reason to suspect that they wouldn't in this timeline, meaning that he'd likely be taken out on a different event, and we're able to simply move past this event, jump cutting to the events that happened with the Overhaul arc, which would begin much like you guys would expect, about 2 weeks after this event, because obviously, Deku would have needed some downtime after this big fight, and UA would have definitely been under a bit of scrutiny thanks to the fact that not only did they get attacked at the USJ, one of their students got severely injured by the hero killer, but now they were also attacked during the forest. So with the students finally returning to class, we would have them once again meeting the big three of UA, resulting in the battle between Mirio and the class, in which Deku, being the class rep, would actually lead all of their classmates, telling them that his quirk allows him to phase through things, immediately recognizing that Mirio was going to be going after the classmates who fight at long range, and so using his quirk to fly towards that direction fast as ever, moving just like Gran Torino would by changing directions and shifting, Izuku would arrive to stop Mirio from hitting the first classmate, having moved like a blur, stunning the class, who would be shocked that when Deku got this fast, knowing that before he was a bullet train, but now? They don't even know what to compare him to. Watching on as Izuku would feign an attack to Mirio, who phasing through the attack would actually throw a fist directly to the direction of Deku. However, Izuku, using the tactic that Tiger would have showed him, he would drag Mirio's fist directly to his arm, shocking Mirio, who would be caught off guard by that, and then lead to 8 projectiles being thrown at Mirio's body, with only one of them actually managing to connect, Mirio having phased just in time for the rest, as he would finally pop out from the distance and the rest of Class 1A would be ready. Izuku would immediately tell his classmates to launch their attacks towards him, Jiro sending out a massive beam of sound towards him, Todoroki sending out a pillar of ice, and Bakugo sending a horde of AP shots while Deku would send out projectiles. Mirio, seeing this all come at him, he would phase through it, deciding that this time he'll just have to take in the close range fighters, lunging towards the direction of Kirishima, knocking him out, as going down one by one in the class, Mirio would finally make his way towards the last line of defense, everyone capable of using long range attacks, resulting in Izuku practically disappearing from where he was, and then appearing right next to Mirio, his eyes barely managing to connect with Izuku's before a punch would connect directly to Mirio's jaw, sending him crashing at the ground in complete shock at how fast he moved. 1 second he was there, and the next he was gone. It was like Deku had just done short-range teleportation, but in reality, Deku had moved so fast with his sliding glide quirk that he might as well have teleported. The classroom immediately uproaring in praise for Deku, who would all be stunned. "When did you get so fast?" they would ask, Bakugo being the only one that would actually know the answer to that, thanks to the fight with All For One and him being present, as Deku would go on to tell them that it was just that training at the forest camp, not really wanting to get too much into the details about what actually took place, because the heroes had already told them, hey, kind of keep this private. All For One isn't exactly a matter that we want televised. So as Izuku would sit there, basically just being glazed by his classmates the entire time, this is when suddenly Aizawa would interrupt, telling them that they've done all they need to do for now. The students all being told that they need to focus on who they're going to be interning with next. As Izuku, thinking things over, he would wonder if Koichi would mind having him back, when suddenly All Might would tell him that he was hoping he could actually go intern with his mentor, Gran Torino. Izuku saying, "Oh right, Gran Torino. He was there at the rescue, right?" All Might being like, "How did you know that?" As Izuku would tell him that he actually saw the memories of All Might when All For One had tried to steal his quirk. All Might saying that he had no idea, as he would pretty much call Gran Torino and try to organize it, but funny enough, Gran Torino would tell him that this old timer has nothing left to teach that kid, saying that if he can handle All For One, he can handle anything. Hanging up the phone on All Might, who would be stunned. This is when Izuku would then end up thinking that maybe he should reach out to Koichi, but Koichi would actually tell him that at the moment he's pretty busy with an investigation, saying that if anything he should go with somebody else. Izuku weighing his options, when suddenly on his way home, Izuku would be stopped by Mirio, who would offer an invitation to join Night Eye, and with Deku realizing that that's another one of All Might's sidekicks and someone of his past, Izuku would immediately accept, knowing that All Might and Sir Night Eye go way back So Izuku would take that opportunity and run with it, making his way to the Sir Nida agency, as Sir Nida would once again try to do that test of, catching the stamp and signing it himself. And because Deku was so incredibly fast in this timeline, he would easily snag that thing from Sir Nida, who, having known that was going to happen, would simply smile, noting that he can actually respect this decision that All Might made. Though he still believes Mirio would have been a better choice, Izuku's not a fight cry off, telling both boys to go on a little bit of a hero patrol, as they would do exactly that. Mirio walking the streets, telling Deku that he probably doesn't need to teach him this because he's already been on an internship, but once again still repeating some of the same things Koichi told them. Both of them kind of just taking the time to talk amongst themselves until suddenly Deku would feel someone bump him. Looking down and seeing a girl with horn and white hair, he would ask if she's okay, immediately noticing the bandages on her arms and legs. As looking into the alleyway, Deku would spot a man wearing a plague mask and green jacket with fur on it. Izuku's mind would instantly make a connection to him being a villain. As Izuku staring at Eri and holding her tight, he would smile at her saying, "Hold on, this'll just take a second." Placing her down, as moving so fast that it practically looks like he was in Haku's mirrors, Deku would start changing trajectories all over the place and sending out a massive multitude of projectile beams at Overhaul, taking the villain down with precision and accuracy. Overhaul's eyes rolling to the back of his head as his pupils would go white and he would fall down to the ground unconscious. He would have literally just been hit by 136 small projectiles that more than would have accomplished the job. And mind you, that would have happened before All For One even had the chance to take off his gloves. Izuku walking back over towards Eri as he would tell her that she's safe now. Mirio just shocked and impressed as ever that Izuku could move that fast, wondering why he didn't do that when they were fighting. Izuku telling him that it's actually a lot easier to do when he actually has solid objects. Mirio nodding as he would say, "Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, you're leaping off of things instead of having to make your own leverage. Nice." He would then go on to apprehend Overhaul, as putting him in some cuffs and hoping that the villain doesn't wake up, Mirio would be the one right next to him as a first responder, taking Overhaul straight to the police station, where Eri would testify of the fact and the things that Overhaul would have been doing to her for the last couple of years. The officers being horrified, as throwing the book at Overhaul, they would immediately throw this man into the slammer. Bro would be in Tartarus in the next 3 hours with power dampening Quirk's cuffs on him, which honestly is not too bad compared to what actually happened to him originally, because remember, Shigaraki straight up ended up taking this man's hands and telling him, "Now you don't have a thumb to suck on," I guess he gets a better outcome. But anyways, with that being the case, the heroes would now have more than enough evidence to raid the Shiseikai household, taking down multitude of villains that they would originally, without the added goal of needing to find Eri. So more destructive heroes would actually be invited, and the raid party would actually go smooth as ever. Meaning that for these events, Sir Nida is not exactly going to be having to die, which, it's a pretty cool positive. And we're able to get into the final arc of the series, which in my personal opinion is a really important one. It's called the Koichi meets All Might arc, because it's going to be pretty cool. Because obviously after Koichi was pretty much one of the biggest reasons why the heroes were able to actually locate what was going on. Obviously normal hero responders likely would have arrived to the location of Izuku, just thanks to the destruction of the building. But thanks to Koichi's tracker and his hoodie, they were able to help out and be way more efficient than they would have been otherwise. So Izuku would end up inviting All Might to meet Koichi, embarking on a trip to the US, where Izuku and All Might would walk into the agency, All Might in disguise, when suddenly finally making it to the back, All Might would buff up, Koichi freaking out as he's like, "All Might! Wait, Izuku, did you bring him?" Izuku nodding as he'd be like, "Yep, sure did. Your hoodie of yours not only made me look fashionable, but also saved my life, so I figured this is the best way I could repay ya." Koichi immediately rushing to his office as grabbing another All Might hoodie that he actually has hung up, he would get All Might to sign it, and he would start asking him a bunch of questions. All Might actually recognizing Koichi from years ago, asking if he was the hero from Naruhara that had been involved with the incident involving the Nomu. Koichi being like, yep, guilty as charged, as All Might would smile, placing his hand over him and saying that he's glad that of all the heroes that Izuku could have gone to his first internship, it was him. He kept them humble, and that's the best thing he could have asked for. All Might smiling with Koichi and Deku and Popstep, as all of them would end up pretty much having like a nice little day together, and we would have like a mini brief time skip in which Deku would finally go on to become a pro hero, being ranked number 1 for obvious reasons, and going down in the history books as a hero that actually surpassed All Might himself. So yeah, that's how I'd like to think that What If Deku had Koichi's powers would end up playing out. Kind of a good little, neat story if I do say so myself. I had a blast recording this one, like I really do mean it, because I've been working on this one for the past week, and I'm just really happy at the commission that I got. Shout out to the person who commissioned this video, you know who you are, bro, and for any of you guys wondering how you can actually commission a video, it's pretty simple. All you really gotta do is join my Discord server, hit me up on Instagram, or even just my email, and then let me know what video you want, how long you want it, what kind of story you're looking for, and your boy will make it for you. But yeah, without no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Like it or die!
That wasn't the line, Kachan!
Whatever.